Good evening, everybody. I'm going to go call the meeting to order in about 30 seconds. Good evening. At this time, I'd like to call this meeting of the Municipal Council to order at 7:02. Mr. Withers, would you kindly do a roll call attendance?
Certainly will. Mr. Blair.
Here.
Ms. DeSimone.
Here.
Mr. Conti.
Present.
Mr. Waterman.
Here.
Vice President Jackson.
Here.
Mr. Delicio, I believe he is not here.
He's not here.
Mr. Kobus.
Here.
Mr. Dolan.
Here.
Ms. Reynolds.
Here.
Ms. Holmes.
Present.
President Cooper.
Here.
10 members are present. Mr. Delicio is not here.
Thank you. Moving right along, Mr. Withers, would you kindly read the notice of the first continued public hearing this evening?
Yes, it's a continued public hearing relative to the street acceptance plan of Grace Lane, length of 615.82 feet.
Thank you. Is there anyone here to speak in favor? Anyone to speak in opposition? Anyone neither for nor against? Council Kobus, we left both of these public hearings open.
Well aware.
To receive information from the planning office. Everything is okay with both of these streets, so I would suggest we close it.
Agreed.
Thank you. That public hearing is closed. Moving right along, Mr. Withers, would you read the notice of the next continued public hearing?
Yes, it's a continued public hearing relative to the street acceptance plan of Simpson Avenue, length of 165.71 feet.
Thank you. Again, my comments from the previous apply to this, but I will just call to see if there is anyone here to speak on this matter this evening related to Simpson Avenue. Seeing and hearing none, Mr. Kobus, would you like to close that public hearing as well?
Yes, please.
That public hearing is also closed. Mr. Withers, would you kindly read the notice of tonight's first public hearing?
Yes, it's a public hearing relative to the proposed amendments to Chapter 18 Local Wetlands Protection of its revised ordinances of the City of Attleboro.
Thank you. And in favor this evening is the mayor sent this down. I am going to ask the mayor to give his presentation first. I know he's on. I see him.
Yes.
Good evening, Mayor.
Good evening.
So the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. And through you, thank you to the council. And just so everybody knows, with me is part of my panel is Gary Eurasian and Nick Wiley. They are going to be speaking with me about this issue. Let's make sure I still have my camera all sorted correctly. I do. Thank you. So I have about 3.5 pages that I have prepared of testimony. I say that because it might seem like it's going on forever, but I want to let you know it's just 3.5 pages. So I'll start by saying good evening to the City Council. I'm here to advocate for the expansion of the wetland protection zone from 25 feet to 75 feet. I'm doing this for several reasons. Over the years, one of the biggest complaints I have received during my 8 years in politics is the way green space is disappearing. Additionally, we need to be on the right side of history and act in a responsible and sustainable way. I cannot understate the importance of this proposal. Attleboro is losing green space at an alarming rate. A 25-foot wetlands protection zone is an outdated policy, and that's assuming that it was ever sufficient in the first place. What we have learned over the last several decades compels us to take action and increase the WPZ to something supported by the science. Let me put this rate of loss into perspective by using easy to follow numbers. If we have 10,000 square feet of green space left, reducing green space by 100 square feet is only a 1% decrease. We can hardly see the effect of 100 square feet. But over time, we continue to reduce what remains. Eventually, when we are left with 1,000 square feet, reducing green space by 100 square feet is a 10% reduction with what remains. This is one point of view I approach this issue with. The loss of green space, and by green space, just to be clear, what I'm talking about is the wetlands area, is literally exponential. It is by definition not sustainable. What we're doing is not sustainable. We cannot continue down the path we have been on. So For people who might not know what a wetlands is, wetlands protection zone, it's an area of the city recognized for its importance to preservation of waterways, wetlands, green space, and wildlife, and human life. A wetlands protection zone is something that functions effectively on a continuum. The larger the wetlands protection zone, the more effective it is. The smaller the wetlands protection zone, the less effective it is. It's on a continuum. There are many communities that have a WPZ much larger than 25 feet. None, to my knowledge, are smaller than 25 feet. The state already has a requirement that for people to operate within 100 feet of wetlands, you need to apply for a permit from the state. This is not a land taking. It's not socialism. It's not a nanny state. It's good public policy and law. The state allows municipalities to have their own level of local scrutiny within that 100 feet. And Attleboro currently has a requirement to get a waiver from the city to operate within 25 feet. I'm seeking to expand that waiver to 75 feet. 75 feet is down from the 100 feet that I wanted to submit to the council. 75 feet was basically my compromise. It's 75 feet is much healthier wetlands protection zone than 25 feet. 25 feet would, in my opinion, be laughable if the situation was not so serious. Think about how much biodiversity needs to live near wetlands. The smaller the buffer, the less of a chance that biodiversity has to survive. The ecology of a wetlands protection zone is important to understand. Don't take my word for it. Let me quote one study. Wetlands buffers are areas that surround a wetland and reduce adverse impacts to wetland functions and values from adjacent development. The literature indicates that buffers reduce wetland impacts by moderating the effects of stormwater runoff, including stabilizing soil to prevent erosion, filtering suspended solids, nutrients, and harmful or toxic substances, and moderating water level fluctuations. Buffers also provide essential habitat for wetland-associated species for use in feeding, roosting, breeding, and rearing of young, and cover for safety, mobility, and the thermal protection. Finally, buffers reduce adverse impacts of human disturbance on wetland habitats, including blocking noise, glare, reducing sedimentation and nutrient input, and reducing direct human disturbance from dumped debris, cut vegetation, and trampling, and providing visual separation. Wetland buffers are essential for wetlands protection. This study was done by Washington State University, funded by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And it wasn't done last year, it was done in 1992, 30 years ago, just about 30 years ago. And let me put it into a more succinct way. One of the core findings of the study is that buffer zone effectiveness increases with buffer width. Additionally, the article finds that land use associated with significant construction and post-construction impacts need greater buffers, and buffers of less than 50 feet in width are generally ineffective in protecting wetlands. Nick Wiley is going to talk more about that later on when he speaks. So as I said, this study was done about 30 years ago. What we have learned about the need to protect our environment has increased in the last 30 years, as has the urgency. The state of Washington and Oregon actually have buffer zones that are nearly 200 and 300 feet. I'm seeking something 75 feet. Those states are some of the greenest in the country and are going to stay that way because of their foresight into what is necessary for sustainability. Studies show that buffers from 50 feet to 150 feet are what is necessary to protect wetland from direct human disturbance. While there is a tipping point of 50 feet as being generally ineffective, anything over 50 gets more effective as we increase the buffer zone. Biodiversity is also critically important in reducing the possibility of diseases. In fact, we know that several communicable diseases have ravaged countries because of unhealthy habitats and ecosystems. Wetlands are critically important for our city. As counterintuitive as it may sound, wetlands help reduce areas that are prone to flooding. I recently read that wetlands absorb rising waters during a storm and hold reservoirs of water during a drought. Things we take for granted here in Attleboro lead to deadly consequences in conflicts and illnesses in other parts of the world. In Attleboro, while people may technically own the land, we are only temporary owners of that land. The land will be here long after we are gone, long after our children are gone, and even their great-grandchildren. Is it such a big deal, and is it such a hardship that we take care of this land that we temporarily inhabit? I think the answer is an obvious no. It's imperative that we act as good stewards of the land that we temporarily inhabit. Once damage is done to a wetland, it can take months to repair something done in days, years to repair something done in weeks, and even decades to repair something done over the course of months. And this assumes that restoration and repair are even attempted. If they are not, the damage is permanent. The consequences are compounded by the duration by which something has been damaged. Some things may not be able to be restored within our lifetimes. Some damage may not be able to be restored within centuries. If you don't believe me, I ask that you visit the former Walton and Lonsbury site on North Ave, which is land that will never be suitable for human habitation other than a parking lot. The area around that site remains damaged. Let me be clear, developers are not the enemy. They're providing a necessary product. Landowners who want to make improvements to their land are not the enemy. They want to live in a comfortable way, making improvements to the land that they live on in a way that's consistent with their vision for pursuit of happiness. The problem becomes when one person does what one person does to land negatively impacts what happens off their land, or what happens to their land after it is no longer their land. As I said, we are temporarily stewards of the land we live on. It also becomes a problem when damage is done that has lasting consequences. This is why we have laws at the state and federal levels, state and federal regulations, and local ordinances. These are good things. They are enacted in an open, transparent, and democratic way. The public gets a chance to offer input and feedback. Nothing being proposed in my submission is new. Everything has been done elsewhere. I'm merely trying to raise our standards here in Attleboro, protect what we have for us and for future generations. You all know the saying, think globally, act locally. That is what this is all about. Let me speak more globally. The earth is warming. There is no question about that. It is a fact so well established that even people who dispute that humans are the cause of the warming agree on this fact. Locally, we cannot reverse the trend, but we must be responsible to do what we can within our authority that we have bestowed to us by the voters. Your vote on this measure can help reduce that warming. An increased wetlands protection zone will help reduce the amount of carbon emissions in the atmosphere. This in turn helps reduce the rate of warming. Heat stroke, drought, reduced crops, loss of livable habitat for animals are just some of the consequences of a warming earth. Communities that adopt green policies are going to be leaders. Cities, states, and countries that move towards zero emissions are going to lead the global economy by setting the standards for sustainability. We must stop thinking in such a narrow and short-sighted manner. There is too much at stake. What we do here is looked at by others. For better or for worse, others will replicate what we do here. We have a habit of sticking with what we have been doing, even if it's killing us. I recently read that when we take a tree out of the ground, we disturb the soil, and it turns out that there's a lot of carbon stored in the soil. In fact, there is more carbon in the soil than in the atmosphere and all plant life combined. When we start removing trees, that stored carbon gets released into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Some people do not think of or understand the consequences of their actions. Things that seem harmless and simple are actually a big deal when everyone is doing them. Some people have an economic incentive to cut down trees and destroy buffer zones. That is why we need politics to set a sustainable course of action. The most effective tree-related strategy for climate change is to stop cutting down so many trees we already have. When I embarked on expanding the Wetlands Protection Zone, I did so with the focus of reducing tree loss in this city. There's nothing wrong with that. However, I've learned that there are so many more reasons to expand the Wetlands Protection Zone. There are going to be there is going to be a lot of testimony tonight that strikes at the heart of what it means to be free. Opponents are going to say that it is going to hurt their investments. Opponents are going to say that this is undemocratic. They're going to say that it is a land taking, that they cannot use their land anymore, that they should get compensation for doing this, that this is socialist, that this is fascist, this is un-American, and so on. I encourage you to listen to the experts. Listen to Gary Arasian and Nick Wiley, who will follow me. They drafted this with a ton of exemptions. Listen to the people in the community who have devoted their lives to protecting the environment. There is no financial incentive for them to take the position they do. Let me conclude by saying that my father owns 190 Rocklawn Ave here in Attleboro. I'd like to buy that property off him someday. It abuts Luther Reservoir. Expanding the Wetlands Protection Zone would absolutely impact the land that I hope to own someday. And I'm happy to see the wetlands protection be expanded from 75 feet or even to 100 feet. This council has supported several initiatives to make Attleboro a cleaner, greener place. I and the rest of the city thank you for that. This is another proposal. Anyone who cares about the environment should support this proposal. Anyone who understands what is going on in the environment should support this proposal. Anyone who recognizes that the land that we own is only owned by us for a brief moment of time should support this proposal. And anyone who wants to protect what we have that is rapidly disappearing should support this. We need to invest in markets, economies, technologies, and in this case, policies that are sustainable. There is no other way to live. We only have one shot to protect our environment. We need to successfully take that shot every day with every action we take. So I'd like to stop there and turn it over to Gary Arasian to give the next portion of our presentation.
President Cooper,
Yes, Council Blair.
we open for questions or comments to the mayor at this time, or would you like to wait till?
Why don't we wait until Gary and Nick go, unless you have something burning. Otherwise, we can ask the questions at the end of whoever.
I just, I wanted to ask him a couple questions, but I'll wait till Gary gets through, and I've got some questions for Gary also.
Sounds good. Thank you, Gary. Thanks for joining.
Hello, Council President and municipal councils, for the record. Oh, okay.
Sorry, guys. Just Gary, when it's time to show those, just let me know.
Okay, man, thank you. Yeah, I don't know if that was going to stay up on that. So thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council President, members of the Municipal Council. For the record, my name is Gary Arasian. I'm the city's Director of Planning and Development. And I'm here tonight to speak in favor of the proposed amendments to Chapter 18, the Local Wetlands Protection Ordinance. Before I begin, I just want to let you know that the conservation agent will also be speaking in favor. And I just wanted to inform you that we're going to be presenting materials to you tonight from different approaches. And we've tried very hard so as not to overlap each other and repeat the same material. I imagine we're going to have lots of questions. You're going to request some clarifications. And I imagine you're going to ask for more information. So at the outset, I just want to offer to the municipal council that Nick and I, assuming that if this public hearing is continued, Nick and I will gladly reappear at the next continued public hearing. If it's closed, Nick and I will gladly attend the committee meetings at that time to answer, again, any additional questions, mop up any clarification, or to submit any additional information. While Nick is going to present the scientific and academic aspects of the proposed ordinance, I'm going to present the proposed ordinance and discuss it from a pragmatic, rational viewpoint. And I think as I progress with my presentation, I think that'll make itself self-evident. So the first thing I'd like to do tonight is, I imagine all of you have the ordinance, the proposed amendments in front of you. I want to walk you through these. I know Councilor Beer has questions. Whatever you want to ask now or later, I'll be happy to try to answer all your questions, Councilor Beer, and that goes for all the councilors. So the first says to amend subsection 18-1.8 permits and conditions of the local wetlands protection ordinance. And although you see an extensive paragraph, the only revision in that section is to increase the WPZ from 20, I don't know why I have this on. I just saw it when I saw my reflection in the on the screen. That's better. I could breathe better. So that entire first paragraph, if you may, simply put, is to increase the WPZ from 25 feet to 75 feet. Nothing more, nothing else in that section. The next section, amend subsection, I'm sorry, chapter 18.1.8, permits and conditions, section C. If you look in the ordinance right now in that section, I'm not suggesting you do that right now. You're going to see that on the 18-1.8, we have sections A, B, and C. We are proposing section letter D. It will follow 18-1.8C as noted in the ordinance. What this does is it articulates all of the allowances that any property owner may propose in the WPZ. So what does that mean? Let's say on one hand it says, well, it's a wetlands protection zone, no disturb, yet Gary, you're telling us you can. And the answer to that question is, yes, you can. Okay, so you may propose improvements in the WPZ, and what section D would do is actually articulate what you could do. If you have those in front of you, great, you have them. If not, I don't know if anybody wants me to read these. I know I imagine we have a lot of speakers, maybe for purposes of brevity, I won't read those tonight. If you have any questions or if any clarification, either Nick or I would be happy to answer those questions. But it's imperative to say that it's a WPZ, and the misconception is I can't touch it. Therefore, woe is me and I can't do anything else. And I just want to reemphasize that that is not the case, that you may. And it's important that to stress that while I might say that, and one might say, well, hey, that's great, Gary, you said it. How do we know in reality when it comes time to appear before the Conservation Commission and the conservation agent that that's not the case? Well, we thought to articulate it in writing in terms of the latitude of the types of work that may be permitted by the Conservation Commission in the WPZ. The next section, actually, I'm going to skip number 3.
Gary, before you move on from number 2,
I'm sorry.
before you move on from number 2 here, adding section D.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that I'm clear, because today in the 25-foot, we don't allow any of these things. Is that right?
No, we do.
So today in the 25-foot, you can add an addition to your house and put that addition within the 25-foot with a permit.
Yes, sir.
I want to build a new house in the 25-foot. Can I do that?
Sure. So 2 separate questions. Okay, well, kind of related, but the answer to your question is today under the 25-foot WPZ, may I put an addition on an existing home in the WPZ? Yes, you'd have to file for an application. And let me also say that that's tantamount to a certain extent, that's tantamount to, and we deal with this more commonly, and that's why I want to bring up the example, is we have a zoning ordinance. This is, you can't build within 30 feet of the front yard setback, and you've got 15-foot side yard setbacks. But we also have a provision of the zoning ordinance, 8.9, that allows for variances. So what this does, Council President, is actually articulates, letter section D articulates, and we thought this is critical, that although this is present operations and conduct of the Conservation Commission, we thought it's imperative to actually articulate it included in the ordinance. So the answer is yes. The second part of your question is, how about a new one? How about a new home? The answer to that question again is yes. Under section 4.2, just bear with me. under section 4.2, discretionary waiver. And under section 4.9.4, permanent disturbance. Under those two sections, one may request of the Conservation Commission to encroach into the WPZ right now in the 25-foot WPZ. That would continue to be the case in the 75-foot WPZ.
And roughly how many buildings have we approved in the 25-foot in the last 5?
Excellent question. So can I ask you for a favor? As I said to you, I'm going to have a very a pragmatic, rational approach. I'm going to get to that. Do you mind if
No,
I
I don't mind at all. I don't mind.
Okay, all right. So again, for the record, the answer to both of your questions are in the affirmative.
Okay.
Okay, you're welcome. Where was I? Oh, okay. This is so awkward doing this on television. Usually I'm standing in front of you, so please bear with me. As I said, I want to skip number 3. Not that it's of any tremendous earth-breaking importance, but I think it's a little unrelated, but it's a good thing we're going to do. But I just want to jump to number 4, which are actually the list of exemptions. This would be inserting section 18-1.8.1 exemptions. This is a new section that we'd be introducing. This gives letters A through H a list of exemptions that would not require, permitting by the Conservation Commission. They're exempt. Okay, so this was originally sent out to the Municipal Council, if you recall, probably, 16 months or so ago, pre-COVID, just change it from 75 to 25. And the conservation agent and I, and certainly the Conservation Commission, were like, we need to pump the brakes on this and take a good hard look. And what has evolved from that is this section D, if you may, this section 18.1.8.1 from myself, the agent, the Conservation Commission, and Mayor Haru has certainly embraced these as well. Section 3 that I just skipped, it's really housekeeping. It's important. I think it's somewhat unrelated, but we thought since we're amending Chapter 18, we thought that we would include this at this time. So as you know, under the local ordinance, a permit under the Local Wetlands Protection Ordinance is valid for a year. I'm sorry, it's valid for 3 years, my pardon. Valid for 3 years. And you could request up to a 1-year extension of time. To align our local ordinance with state statutes, we're asking or recommending to the Municipal Council is to extend that 3-year extension, the 1-year extension to a 3-year extension. So right now, under the way it's written, the local ordinance, you get a permit, it's valid for 3 years, and you may ask the Conservation Commission for a 1-year extension. What we're proposing to the Municipal Council is to maintain the 3-year permit validity, but increase it to a 3-year extension.
Why?
Because it aligns, yep, it's okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. Because it aligns itself. First of all, we think it's good public policy. We've learned over the years that you grant a permit and lots of things go wrong. And rather than holding that to a 1 year, the commission doesn't have to grant 3 years, but it gives it the flexibility, or at least even the applicant, to ask for 3 years, because it allows a little leniency, but more so because it aligns itself with state statutes, Councilor Jackson. Okay. So let's talk about the 75 feet. Let's talk about the allowances, and let's talk about the exemptions. So the importance of the WPZ. What's the importance of the 25 foot? What's the importance of increasing it to 75 feet? And why to 75 feet? So Nick's going to answer these, and I don't want to steal his thunder again. He's going to, again, take this from the scientific approach and to really get into the fingernails and discuss the optics and forensics, why we've come up with that. But let me offer to you, as the city's Director of Planning and Development, from 20,000 feet, why I think these are important. First of all and foremost, it's good public policy. I can't imagine an argument being that it's not good public policy. We're talking about natural resources. We're talking about wetlands. We're talking about bank restoration. We're talking about wildlife. And remember, and what we're protecting with the WPZ is protecting the wetlands through protecting the uplands. So no matter how you slice it, I think, whether academically, scientifically, or from a practical standpoint, I think it's good public policy. I submit to the council that I think, in my opinion, that it's consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. And lastly, it's substantiated. It is substantiated by numerous scientific reports opining that a wider buffer or a wider WPZ, let me call it a WPZ, let me not say buffer. So we're not splitting hairs on what we're talking about. That there are numerous scientific reports that opine that a wider buffer is more effective to protecting the wetlands. Those references, Nick will present to you when I'm done. We will submit those to you, hard copies, or if you want electronically, however, we could either email those to you or we could put those in your mailbox. So there are 3 essential resources outside of stormwater that the Conservation Commission regulates. One is floodplain, one are vernal pools, and the third are wetlands. So I want to impress that the 75-foot is within the existing 100-foot Wetlands Protection Act buffer zone. We have 2 other resources, and I have a graphic that I'm going to represent. I'm going to demonstrate. I'm going to show you these, but let me just state the 75-foot, where if we were to go from 25 feet to 75 feet, please understand that that is still wholly, completely, 100% within the 100-foot existing buffer zone of the Wetlands Protection Act. The other 2 resources, vernal pools and wetlands, the WPZ is on top of those, is in addition to. So Mayor, may I ask you for your help? Because I'm not exactly the most techie person in the world. If you would kindly bring up to the screen or share with the council, document D.
Document D, we have.
I'm sorry, document D, document D2.
D2, we have document 1, PDF 2, is that the 2?
Yes, sir,
That's 2.
yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, let me pull that up. Okay, and so what I'll do is I will
Yeah,
shrink this and then
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to share. So we're going to share the screen now so you guys can see what Gary just asked me to. Okay, share screen. And this one right
Yeah.
here. Share. Okay, there we go.
thank you. So does everybody see this? Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I didn't hear it. Okay, so,
I do.
okay, thank you. As long as someone says yes, so I don't know if I was off my microphone or if you guys got shut down when we brought this up. So at the very top, it is imperative for you to read that the existing 25-foot WPZ off the edge of a vernal pool, whether it is a certified vernal pool or a potential vernal pool, will not be increased to 75 feet. So the graphic I present, it's very rudimentary, but it's the simplicity of it that makes the point. So in the inner oval, if you may, I've drawn a green oval, and in it, let's call that the vernal pool. The vernal pool is afforded a 100-foot buffer by the Commonwealth. 100-foot buffer, Mass General Law, Chapter 131, Section 40, Wetlands Protection Act, from the edge of the vernal pool. Our local Wetlands Protection Ordinance increases that, and this has been the case since its adoption of the local Wetlands Protection Ordinance back in 2001, that our local Wetlands Protection Ordinance affords an additional 25-foot WPZ around that 100-foot buffer. I want to express that by increasing, if the municipal council in its wisdom were ultimately to vote to increase the buffer, the WPZ, I'm sorry, I'm going to stick to the WPZ, from 25 feet to 75 feet, I implore you to understand that it will not increase the WPZ around the vernal pool. I'm sorry, around the buffer. So it will not be 175. Under this ordinance, it will remain 125. Okay? All right, I'm going to move on to the next document. Mayor, if you call up document
Let's see.
D3.
New share. Okay, so let me X out of this. And now I'm doing something I haven't done before. There we go. Okay, document D3.
Yes, Mayor.
Okay, here we go.
Okay, great. If you can reduce that.
Use this. There we go.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, this is the second of 3 graphics I have, at least with wetland lines. So this represents, it says, again, let me read it at the top, the existing 25-foot Wetlands Protection Zone, WPZ, off the edge of the 100-year floodplain will not be increased to 75 feet. The blue line represents a random elevation of a floodplain, of the 100-year floodplain, whatever you want to call it. Let's call it a 100-year elevation. The second resource that the Conservation Commission has jurisdiction over is the floodplain. Our local wetlands protection ordinance, again, effective 2001 when it was initially adopted, put up a 25-foot WPZ off the edge of the 100-year floodplain. I want to assert tonight that should the municipal council ultimately adopt the proposed amendments to the local wetlands protection ordinance, the 25-foot WPZ will remain 25 feet. It will not increase to 75 feet. Okay? All right. Mayor, this is the third graphic. Thank you, folks.
Okay, so which number do you want?
This will be document 1, Mayor.
Okay, then we have table 1 as well. If you want.
Yeah, that's for later.
Okay, cool.
All right. So I saved the best for last. The third resource is the edge of the wetland. So I'm going to go right to left. The green line, and let me also say this is not drawn to scale, so please bear with me. But the green line on the right is the wetland or the wetland edge, and that's why I got all words in capital letters, wetlands, to the right of that green line. Under our local wetlands protection ordinance, when adopted in 2001, established the 25-foot PZ. That's the next line going right to left, which is represented by the black line. So what I tried to do is coordinate the language with the line to make it a little easier to present tonight, only because I'm not in front of you. So I'm trying to make this as simple as possible to follow. The next line would be the proposed 75-foot WPZ from the wetland line. And then ultimately, the third line, if you may, going right to left, the light blue is the 100-foot buffer yard established by Mass General Laws, Chapter 131, Section 40, the Wetlands Protection Act. So the distance between the green line and the blue line is what we've all come to know over the years, going back to when DEP was DEQE, if you recall that, the Department of Environmental Quality and Engineering, probably going back into the 70s, to today, is the 100-foot buffer. Any work that you do in that upland, and notice at the very top, I've got a red line going left to right. Please understand that's all upland. That is not wetland. That any work inside that 100-foot buffer between the blue line and the green line requires the filing of a notice of intent application with the Conservation Commission. What's important is to stress that the purple line, which would represent the 75-foot WPZ, is inside the 100-foot buffer. I stress that because I understand there's some misconception out there that the 75-foot or this purple line would actually be to the left of the blue line and actually make it 175, and that is not the case. So unlike the floodplain line, and I'll give you copies of these maps, of these plans that I drew, unlike the floodplain and the vernal pool where the WPZ is outside of the buffer, in this case, please understand, and it's critical, that the WPZ is actually on the inside of the buffer. So it is not in addition to the buffer, it's inside the buffer. Okay? So, yep,
Go ahead, Gary. I told Peter we'd wait for questions. We'll wait for questions.
okay. All right, so now I'm gonna go on, and someone had asked something about some numbers, and that's what I'm gonna get into right now. So I want to talk a little about a practical approach. What does this mean now? The real world. Thank you, Mary. If you could pull out table 1. Thank you. Beautiful. And I will share these again with the municipal council. I'll email them to you tomorrow, and I'll also put, if you like, a copy of these handouts in your mailbox. So, Council President, I think you're the one that asked about the impact on houses. I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. So that's where I'm in my presentation now. So I took randomly, completely randomly, 6 subdivisions, actual real life subdivisions. So these aren't in some type of a scientific laboratory where there are certain characteristics that are amplified or de-emphasized. I should say emphasized or de-emphasized, where you might say, or one might say, not you, one might say, well, it's kind of slanted because you put in what the optics are. So the 6 subdivisions, let me restate, are actual real subdivisions that were engineered and were presented to the Attleboro Planning Board, and in almost all cases to the Conservation Commission. So of the 6 subdivisions I looked at, and these were completely random, and one of the things I want to put out on the table, if the council wants more samples, a larger sample size, I'll be happy to do that for you. So clearly 1 or 2, I did not think, in my opinion, is sufficient. Clearly 1 would not be. I didn't think 2 were. I thought for purposes of tonight's public hearing, just to offer a flavor of what we were trying to do some research on, I thought 6 was sufficient, primarily because they're fairly large. They go from small, which is, I think, 12, to large, which is roughly 50. And there are 183 lots in the 6 subdivisions that I looked at. If we were to apply today, and now I'm going to go from left to right. So I'm in the blue zone now, where it says the first column, it says house lots affected by 75-foot WPZ as designed. And what I mean by that, as approved, as designed by the engineer. I'll tell you that of the 183 lots, I'm going to say only, because I can, only 29 lots of the 183, or 15.85%, right now would be affected. Now, of course, now one question is, well, what do you mean by affected, Gary? What I did is I literally took out a scale and I went through all the lots in these subdivisions and I measured off the 75-foot WPZ off the wetland line, literally one by one. And I detected that, for example, in subdivision, the top one, 37, 8 of the lots, if we were to apply the 75-foot WPZ as that subdivision is designed, 8 of the lots would be affected. So I came up with 29 lots. Okay, so what does that mean now by affected? Well, the next thing I did, I've got in the next column, house lots affected by the 75-foot WPZ after modifying a setback. Very simply, just by looking at it with my eye, with 35 years of experience looking at it with a scale, by simply moving or adjusting a house back or forth 5 feet or 6 feet, I determined that that number would be reduced by 15 house lots, so that the WPZ, after simply moving the setback of the house, would then only affect 7.65% of the houses, or 14. So again, as we apply it as is, 29 would be affected by the 75-foot WPZ. By simply moving the house forward a few feet, it would affect 15 would come off that list and would still continue to affect 14 of the 183, or 7.65% of the house lots of the 183. The next iteration, given that house lots, as you may know, certainly aren't coming in at the minimum lot size anymore. minimum lot sizes, depending on what zoning district, vary from 10,000, 12,000, 16,000, 20,000, and 30,000 square feet. Well, let me reassure you that in the vast majority of the examples, house lots come in a lot larger than the minimum lot size. So what I then looked at is, aside from looking at modifying the setback by just moving the house over to the left or to the right or closer to the street, by looking at the adjoining lot lines, I said, well, if you were to make lot A a little bigger by borrowing some land off lot B and C, by making those slightly smaller, you'd make lot A a little bigger. And by making lot A a little bigger, you're able to move the house away out of the 75 foot. So by doing that, I reduced that by another 7 lots. And I came down to 7 to tell you that in my professional opinion, out of the 183 lots, 7 would be affected by the WPZ after modifying the setback and modifying the lot lines. The 4th iteration, I have house lots affected by 75-foot WPZ after normal site engineering. And you'll see there that I put a question mark. And the reason why I did that, I wasn't in a position to redesign a subdivision to determine that if you start moving things around, which happens lots of times during the review process, that one would not be able to absorb the additional 7 house lots. So I think it's not a stretch to tell you, and this is good news, that if one was to apply normal site engineering and look at those 6 subdivisions and modify it, aside from the 2 simple modifications that I did in my office, that one would be able to absorb the 7. Let's say we couldn't. Let's say that after some site engineering, you reduce that down to, say, 3 or 4. So an argument is that out of 183 lots, conceivably, and I have to be logical, I have to be practical, I have to be fair. I have to be. I could certainly argue to say that the number would be 0, but I certainly can see an argument to say, well, Gary, it could be 7. So I would submit to you that the number from 183 could be brought down to somewhere between 0 to 7. And I can't get any further refined on that only because I didn't redesign the entire subdivision. But what I can tell you is that applying very simple, unsophisticated, and applying a lot of years of experience by looking at those subdivisions between the setbacks and the property lines, I think we could reduce that number easily down to 7 out of 183. So my answer to you, to a certain extent, Council President, is we're looking at approximately 0 to 7 house lots based on real subdivisions that we'd have to take a harder look at to see if those would continue to be buildable lots. And also, let me say this, that let's say that we couldn't move those out of the 75 foot. Let's just give the benefit of the doubt that of those 7 that I whittled down to can't be moved. And at some point, the 75-foot buffer zone would touch that. Please understand, again, that's subject to section 4.2 and 4.94, 4.9.4. 4.2 being discretionary waiver and 4.9.4 being permanent disturbance. The applicant can certainly request a Conservation Commission for a waiver from the strict compliance of the ordinance. So one way or the other, one could find an avenue to get that down to 0. That's important because had we come up with these numbers and I came back and told you, well, out of 183, no matter how you slice that or how you cut up that pizza, 150 of the 183 lots would not be in existence. We got a problem, Houston. But I got that down to 0 to 7, and I'll be more than happy to share those optics with you. And the 0 to 7 also does not take into consideration that even after normal site engineering, the engineer came back and said, I just can't fit this in here, and we're looking at losing 7 lots. One may request the Conservation Commission permission under those 2 sections to actually put that house in. I got a little more, and I promise I'll not to be so long-winded. That's table 1. So another thing we did, I asked the assistant conservation agent, I didn't just press Nick for all this. I had our assistant conservation agent look into some optics for me as well. So I said to you, oh yeah, thank you, buddy.
Stop sharing the screen. How do I get out?
1 second, folks.
Just trying to, hey, Nick, do you know how to stop sharing screen? Pause share.
You did it a second ago.
How do we stop?
Hit the share screen button again, yeah, right there.
Okay. And then how do we stop sharing?
You gotta get out of that share.
There we go.
There we go.
Good
Okay,
job.
cool.
How do you get rid of that? All right.
Get rid of this. Okay.
So, again, the local wetlands protection ordinance was adopted in '01. I asked my assistant conservation agent to do some research to look at all the applications that were filed with the Concom since 2001. And I will tell you, we only got to 2004 to 2020. I kicked out 2021 only because we're not through that year yet. So it's not fair to use those statistics. And she got to 204, and that's where we ended it. But that gives you a really good sample size because that's 17 years. In that period, as best as we could determine, there were 50 local wetland protection ordinance applications, 43 of which had to do with housing, whether housing construction, addition, septic system, driveway, so forth and so on, but some actual housing construction, real brand new housing construction. Of those, of the 43, 42 of them were approved. And these are in the WPZ. 43 of them were approved because I'm looking at local wetland protection ordinance applications, not just the NOI, which means they were inside the 100-foot buffer. These were inside the 25-foot WPZ. So what does that tell you? It tells you that the developers are respecting the line and they are not often and casually, and I appreciate that very much, not just casually appearing before the local commission and asking to put homes inside that buffer. But in instances when you don't really have any options, they do. It's a small number, but yet the Conservation Commission, being practical, applying good science, applying the regulations, applying the ordinance, concluded that in 42 of the 43 instances that it was sound, it was plausible to allow the encroachment into the WPZ. The last thing I want to share with you, and I'm sorry I'm taking so long with this, we started research on what other communities do with respect to the WPZ. And we looked at 50 of them. And we can continue this, because we can continue the research, but for purposes of tonight's public hearing, I felt that 50 is a very good sample size. You can certainly get more of a sample size. Of the 50, they all have a 25-foot WPZ. In one or two instances, I noticed it was a little less. I forgot which two communities. I think one was a couple of them had a 20-foot. But for purposes of my presentation, let me tell you, they were all 25. In 40 of the instances, okay, 40 of the 50, they had a 50-foot WPZ. And that in 11 cases, the WPZ was either 75 feet or greater. And some of them, interestingly, talk about discretion to the commission, said it's at the discretion of the Conservation Commission, where there wasn't a distance. It wasn't a hard 50 or a hard 25 or a hard 100 or a hard 75. It was at the discretion of the commission. So how do you include those? I don't know. So I went by the ones, folks, that actually had the numbers. So again, 40, they all had 25, 40 had 50 foot, I'm sorry, 40 communities had 50 foot, and 11 communities had 75 feet or greater. The last thing I want to offer to the council is also yet another practical approach. And this is something certainly the Conservation Commission was 100% supportive of, as is the mayor. Hello?
Point of order?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Or can I ask a quick question, President Cooper? Sorry.
Sure.
Just those numbers, you said you looked at 50 communities?
Yeah,
In 40 had 50 or greater, and 11 had
They're all
75
subsets.
or greater. Okay,
Yeah,
yep.
they're not in addition
11
to,
just
yeah,
got it.
you
Got
don't
it.
add them. They're all subsets.
Got it.
Okay?
All right.
All
Thank
right. You know, you're funny because my heart took a beat too, and I noticed that. I go, no, wait a minute. No. They're subsets. Yes.
Sorry, it took me a second. Thank you.
That's okay. No worries. So the last thing I want to leave you with is this. And again, the Conservation Commission is 100% supportive of this, as am I, Mr. Wiley, and certainly, again, of course, we ran this by the mayor, that should the municipal council ultimately vote to adopt the ordinance amendments, I think it's only fair that we make the effective date, put it out. And what I mean by that is that we put in perhaps the effective date of the ordinance, let's say for the sake of discussion, you would have voted tonight. I know you're not, but I'm just saying that the effective date would be September 2nd. The reason for that is, out of fairness, there are a number of applications that are pending before the Conservation Commission that base their engineering on a 25-foot WPZ. There are going to be applications that will be filed in the next few days because they've already done their engineering based on a WPZ. They're not haven't even been filed yet. And I think out of fairness and practical application, that should the municipal council ultimately approve the amendments, I respectfully submit and I respectfully implore the council to consider at least a 120-day effective date so that all the applicants that are pending before the commission right now and in the next several days, they may be applying that base their engineering on a 25-foot WPZ, out of fairness to them, that they should be able to go through the permitting process based on the current ordinance and not the amendments. And we could discuss that later on too, but I want to leave you with that. I want to thank you for your time. And I know, again, some questions, but did you want to transition the questions now for me and the mayor, or do you want to also hear Nick's presentation?
Let's go to Nick, and then we can ask questions.
Okay, folks. Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Good to see you all again. So for the record, my name is Nick Wiley. I am the environmental planner and conservation agent for the city. I am here to voice my support for the proposed amendments to Attleboro's local wetlands protection ordinance. In my time working as the environmental planner for this city, it has become clear that the current 25-foot wetlands protection zone does not offer an adequate amount of protection to support the resource areas protected under the ordinance. 25 feet is not enough distance to adequately filter out pollutants for runoff coming from developed properties. Scientific studies have shown that vegetated buffers of 25 feet or less do not reduce disturbance to adjacent wetlands. A study done by the Washington State Department of Ecology found that buffers of less than 50 feet in width are generally ineffective at protecting wetlands. Additionally, a research paper produced by the Environmental Law Council found that buffers of 30 to 100 feet or more will remove pollutants more consistently, and larger buffers will be more effective over the long run because smaller buffers can become saturated with sediments and nutrients, gradually reducing those smaller buffers' effectiveness. It is also much harder to maintain the long-term integrity of smaller buffers. Science shows that a larger wetland protection zone is needed to effectively protect wetlands. So those studies I referenced, I'm happy to provide those to you. I will do so tomorrow, and I'm happy to provide any additional studies that may be requested by this council as well. So intrusion into the 25-foot wetlands protection zone has become common, and once that area has been disturbed, it's difficult to restore it back to its pre-existing condition. The loss of mature vegetation in these areas takes decades to replace, and once the mature vegetation is lost, the value of the wetlands protection zone is severely diminished. Furthermore, destabilization of the soils in the wetlands protection zone allows excess sediment and nutrients to flow into adjacent wetlands and adversely affect the ecology of the wetland itself. A larger wetland protection zone is needed to also protect the habitat of wetland-dependent species. Many wetland-dependent species will rely on the upland areas adjacent to wetlands for their survival, and the majority of these species require much more than a 25-foot buffer to have adequate habitat. In addition to providing greater protection for the wetlands, a wider wetland protection zone will advance Attleboro's resilience towards the negative effects of climate change by preserving more mature vegetation that provide the benefits of sequestering carbon dioxide. We have learned more about climate change and its effects since this ordinance was originally adopted, and we need to do more to build resiliency towards climate change for the years to come. So next, I'd like to address some misconceptions that I have heard regarding this ordinance. So in our proposed amendments, we have drafted an exemption section designed to protect existing property owners' previously developed land. I've heard many concerns that the amendment to the ordinance would take away people's ability to use their previously developed land. That is false. Section 4 of the proposed amendment states that mowing existing lawns and maintaining existing landscaped areas would be exempt from the provisions of the ordinance. Planting of new native species and shrubs and trees would also be exempt, and maintenance of existing buildings within the Wetlands Protection Zone would also be exempt. People will still be able to utilize their properties as they currently have been doing. We have also introduced a section with allowable activities within the Wetlands Protection Zone. Some of these allowable activities include additions onto single-family homes, repairing of septic systems, conversion of lawn to uses accessory to residential structures, such as decks, sheds, above-ground pools, and handicap accessible ramps. Additionally, we would also allow the repair and replacement of driveways that may be in the Wetlands Protection Zone currently as well. And so lastly, I had seen a letter submitted to this council that states access to upland areas blocked by the Wetland Protection Zone is prohibited. That is false. Section 18-1.8b of the ordinance, as it currently exists today, states that the commission may allow an applicant to alter the Wetland Protection Zone to access upland areas if the commission has determined the work will not cause significant adverse impacts to the resource areas protected by this ordinance. Access in this case would mean the construction of a driveway or roadway. So this section is going to remain unchanged as we have proposed in this amendment. When it comes to allowing access, there's numerous subdivisions throughout the city that have been allowed to not only access through the Wetlands Protection Zone, but if they meet the performance standards of not only our local ordinance, but the Wetlands Protection Act, they may actually cross the wetland itself. Again, as long as they're meeting those necessary performance standards. But access is not strictly prohibited. We may allow that to happen. So that concludes my presentation for tonight. Does anyone on the council have any questions for myself, Gary, or the mayor?
Thanks, Nick. I think we probably do. Does anybody have any questions for Nick before he gets out of the seat? Councilor Blair and Councilor DeSimone.
Nick, thanks for coming tonight. I know you're in the hot seat, but this word may and ask for a variance doesn't sit well with me. I'm a firm believer in property owners' rights, and I think this infringes on them tremendously. And it's a may. You know, I get scared by the word may or might be or possibly. It's too blank. There's nothing by right that I see. And I think property owners have a right to use their property. I wasn't an advocate of the last proposal. In fact, I fought hard to get to 25 feet. We started at 100 and we got down to 25. And honestly, Nick, have you had any problems with developers? And I understand you ask for 50 feet in most occasions and they go along with it. Is that true?
No, most of the time they know they can go right up to the 25-foot wetlands protection zone. We ask to see if we can get a larger buffer to help provide greater protection, but a lot of the time that might not be the case due to the lot's configuration. I mean, we do take into account that if they're building a new home, they are going to want some form of a backyard. So it's a case-by-case basis where we need to see what the existing conditions are on the land currently and then see what they're proposing before we make a good determination on it.
But let me rephrase this maybe. Isn't it a natural thing for you to try to push it to 50 feet?
No, I would not say that is natural. It depends on the wetland I am reviewing if I think I should recommend a greater buffer be installed.
Okay, Nick. Thank you.
Council D. Simone.
Thank you, President Cooper. Hi, Nick. Two quick questions, if I may. As you may know, the governor recently signed the bipartisan mass climate policy. It talks about carbon emissions. It talks about carbon sequestration. And I know it's early and it's a big legislation, but do you see any relationship between what is going to be expected of municipalities to align with the goals set by the Commonwealth for carbon emissions reduction and carbon sequestration? I mean, is this part, I guess, of what the Commonwealth's trying to achieve?
I mean, certainly the protection of open space and protecting of any natural carbon sinks certainly aligns with what the Commonwealth is trying to do. As far as that latest act of legislation, I can't say explicitly because I haven't been able to read the entire thing yet.
Right.
I do know it is trying to cut emissions and they are striving to get towards net zero emissions by 2050. So I have to imagine any municipality that wants to take carbon sequestration more into account is only going to align with the bipartisan policies that were presented there.
All right, and thank you. My second question, there is a lot of confusion around what's possible, what's not possible. Would you and/or Gary, as this issue is pending, would you be open to meeting with residents who either have filed permits or thinking about file permits to have a sit down and try to alleviate some of these concerns and to correct misinformation? Because whether it passes or fails, I don't want it to do so based on misinformation.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, I am happy to meet with anyone that has concerns about whether it's the current ordinance or these proposed amendments. Gary and I are happy to meet with people to address those concerns, let them know what is the fact of the ordinance now, what would be the facts if amendments were to be proposed, approved by this council. I'm more than happy to address any of those concerns because I would want everyone to know exactly what this would mean for the city and its future.
Thank you, Nick. And if someone wanted to meet with you and/or Gary, should they reach you individually? Would you do like a community discussion? You have any thoughts on how you might?
We could do both. If there was enough people that warranted large community discussion, we'd be happy to set up some kind of public meeting. Otherwise, I encourage people to send me an email, call me. I'm in the office 8:30 to 4:30 almost every day, unless I'm doing site visits.
Very good. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, President Cooper.
Thank you. Council Conti, do you have questions for Nick? You're muted, Richard.
I do. Nick, it was the mayor who said that you really need 150 feet to protect from human interference, but you seem to be the one who has all the studies, and I'm supposing that the mayor got that information from you in your material. Would you be so kind as to go through the studies that you have and find areas where that zone to protect from human interference is isolated in those studies and get those into my mailbox? Because if it's 150 feet to protect the water from human interference and the state has a 100-foot buffer, 75 foot is only halfway to the 150, and I need to do some reconciliation there. So I would appreciate what you have on that 150 foot zone. And that concludes the question for Nick. I do have another question for Gary later on.
Okay, great. Thank you, Richard. Nick, thank you very much. I think we'll go in reverse order. So questions for Gary and then lastly, questions for the mayor.
Thank you all for allowing me the time to speak tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to see you. Gary,
Again?
yeah, well, we can hear you. Thank you for coming back. I have a couple of questions, just clarifying questions for myself, and then I know Councilor Blair has questions as well. So to your table 1 analysis that you did on the subdivisions that you, and maybe this question should be later in my series of questions, but what prevents you from suggesting to developers, you have jurisdiction in 100 feet right now today, right?
Correct. Concom, right.
The Conservation Commission has jurisdiction in 100 feet under a notice of intent application filing to the city saying, hey, and just for the layperson, that notice of intent application is saying, hey, I, so-and-so, want to do some work within 100 feet of a wetland, right?
Correct.
So the Conservation Commission looks at the impacts of that, and it gets approved or denied or revised, right? I mean, there's sort of three outcomes of the revised with an approval.
Well, it's two outcomes, either approval which is still a revision, or denial.
Right.
Yeah.
So today you could say, geez, you've got 6 houses that are close to the 25 foot. You got a wetlands crossing going from an upland to an upland. You have sidewalks in the 25 foot, which is allowed. So could we pull these houses back, and either the developer is going to say yay or nay, but you have some jurisdiction over that today. So I'm just trying to understand what it gets the city if using your words, a small impact to the overall development going to 75 feet.
Sure. So then that's going to go back to the argument, the scientific argument, Mark, of why 75 feet. So what I tried to do is offer a compromise to the council to understand that the Conservation Commission is always ready to discuss how to go about fitting a home that's under its jurisdiction. What I'm proud to say is, whether it's the planning board, zoning board, or Concom, honestly, from my perspective, they're very facilitatory. What they're not is, they don't look at a situation and say, what's wrong with this? What they'll do is look at a situation, work with the developer, work with the residents, and see how best we could fit these into the regulations. So they're very facilitatory. But the point I was trying to stress is to say that, from a practical standpoint, is the impact that great? In my humble opinion, the answer is no. But the importance of the buffer isn't whether or not you can allow the development in there, in that buffer, whether it's 25, 50, or 75. The importance of the buffer is to the environment, is by creating that buffer, that sense of separation. And you'll see in the reports that that Nick's going to give you, that the effectiveness of that upland buffer as a protector of the wetland increases on that upland, the greater or the wider, I shouldn't say the greater, the wider that buffer is. So the answer isn't so much from a building standpoint, Mark. I can't justify that, because I think we all work together to try to help create more of a housing stock. The importance, the way I have to answer that question, is the importance that lies in the buffer itself. Why is it important? And I have to defer to the comments that Nick made about the carbon loading, about the amount of encroachment that you get up to the 25, that eventually you get nitrate loading, whatever, into the, and runoff that goes over the 25 feet into the wetland. So if you were to make that wider, doubling it or tripling it, it just makes the protection of that wetland that much greater. So I think it was, to answer the question, I'm sorry if it sounds convoluted, it's really not necessarily the housing that, well, if they're going to work with you anyway, why impose it? In and of itself, the buffer needs to be widened to protect the wetland. In the meantime, the Conservation Commission, through a very practical way of looking at development, still will work with the developer and not completely say, no way, this is off, you can't encroach into it, hard line. There are going to be situations from site to site to site, as depending on the extent of the constraints and the number of constraints, that not too many sites or lots, even in a subdivision, are the same. They're similar, but they're not the same. So they'll cherry pick to see which ones they need to work with. But in the meantime, what the city is offering as a matter of policy is that we embrace this wider buffer. No matter how you slice it, it's better for the environment. That's the best way I can answer it. I hope it's clear. If you want, I could Probably if I spent some time and I put it up in a position paper, I could articulate it a little better, but that's my answer, Mark, for that.
Okay, so I think you answered my question about how many waivers have been granted with the 43, 42 being approved and one that was denied, right? So that was 43 times, just again, saying it in a non-technical way, but still saying the same thing. 43 times the city approved some type of construction, I think you called it real construction, in the 25-foot wetlands protection zone in the 17 years you looked at.
And yeah, and those are just residential. That's not even getting into the non-residential applications that have been filed with the city.
Okay.
That's even a greater number. But since I figured we can all relate, if I may, more to residential, and I know that's very close to Peter's heart, so I thought I would just concentrate the presentation, if that's okay with the council, on residential development. But there's also the other side of the, well, I shouldn't say the other side of the coin, the other type of development, which is non-residential. Those come before the commission as well.
Right. And then my other question, Gary, is I hear your numerator in that equation of 43, but I don't hear your denominator of how many residential notice of intent applications were filed for the same type of construction, right? So is 43 a big number or a small number related to the overall applications?
Sure.
Like 43 doesn't mean much to me.
Yep, fair enough. I think the number, Nick, I think we said 513. Yeah, it's in the hundreds.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think, if I may,
And some of my questions, Gary, are just because of these are the things that I
no, and I have an answer. Sure. So when I
on that position, so I have a pretty good idea of what to.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And
So,
when I spoke with Emily, I think the number was north of 500.
So, all right, and then my, so yeah, about 10% or so of the applications for that construction are in that. It's about 8. And then another question, Gary, is there any change to the calculations, or I didn't see anything here, or to the protections of isolated land subject to flooding in this ordinance change?
Sure. Mr. President, may I ask Nick to answer that question? Because I'm intimate, but he's so much more intimate than I am, if that's okay.
Send the council an email. I don't need the answer right now.
Okay, Nick, did you get the question? You sure?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. All right, so Nick will shoot an email to Virginia and and asking her to disseminate that amongst the council.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. That Councilor Blair.
I asked you this question before on a one-to-one basis. You more or less said at that time that this ordinance request didn't come directly from you or from Nick or the Conservation Committee. This came as a request from the mayor for you to make up write this ordinance and bring it before us?
Yeah, so the memo, that Nick and I signed, that absolutely came from us because we have the technical aptitude, Councilor Blair.
I understand that.
Okay.
What I asked you,
Yes.
you didn't initiate it with the Conservation Committee or your office, correct?
That was from the mayor's. That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for being honest and sincere.
Well, first of all, I'm always honest, so that goes without
Oh,
saying. But
Gary, we've had a
I
good
know.
relationship over
I know,
20 years.
so
We've had some closed door discussions and we've had some open door discussions.
So a couple of thoughts, if I may. You had asked earlier, and I think Councilor DeSimone kind of also asked along that because you talked about language that you're not comfortable with, language such as may.
Yeah.
What you like is shall. Well, and Nick's sitting right here, so I'm going to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but everything that comes before the Zoning Board of Appeals, that I could talk to you assertively, everything is may. Nothing is by right. Everything. every application, whether it's variance or special permit, and occasionally we get an appeal, in
Well-
every instance, it's all
My-
discretionary.
my
Everything that
com-
comes before the commission is discretionary.
I
The only-
understand,
the
I
only board-
understand that, Gary. I'm
Okay.
not disputing. My opinion, there should be more shells than may.
Okay,
Because if it forms more government as far as I'm concerned, and the less chance of one being granted
Yeah.
if somebody has a personal interest in it. You might not be there forever. You
No, I
might
know.
trust.
I appreciate that, but all I want to say, what you're talking about, which you can always change a law, you can always repeal it, but what you're talking about, Council Blair, is really legislation at Beacon Hill to change, you know.
That's right. It should be at Beacon Hill, not necessarily.
Yeah,
Attleboro.
yeah.
Thank
So,
you.
okay, right? So whether we agree or disagree on, discretion shall or may, I just want to just make it up. While you know, and the council knows, this is an opportunity sometimes to actually educate the public too, that, it's not just very discretionary on a very narrow point where the Conservation Commission has all this authority to say, you may have it, but here are the, everything they do is discretionary. They don't have to grant, if you don't meet the optics, if you're 2 feet into the buffer, way far away from the WPZ, they may find that it's contrary to the tenets of the Wetlands Protection Act and deny it. So everything is may with them. Everything is made with the zoning board, just the planning board. And I'm not going to say 50-50, 60-40, just the planning board in any community has plans or application processes that are by right. But the planning board also has discretion. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Counselor.
Thank you.
Okay.
Counselor DeSimone and then Conti.
Thank you, President Cooper. Gary, great job. Good to hear from you as always. I just want to follow up on Councilor Blair's line of questioning. The council recently reviewed the hazard mitigation plan that you and Nick put together after convening community members to discuss topic of concern. And if I recollect correctly, some of the primary issues of concern, I think they were listed as critical or serious, were climate change, flooding, and drought. The recommended action, among others in that plan, was also possibly extending the wetlands protection zone. Does that match with your recollection of what was contained in your document? Okay.
Correct.
So that was what, 2 years ago, Gary, that this
No.
discussion?
No, that was 4 months ago.
Okay. Well, but when the groups met, when the community members met in City Hall,
Oh, the charrettes? Oh, the plan.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant the adoption of the plan.
no, the whole process.
Yeah, and if you remember, I think you were there,
Yes, I
Councilor.
was.
Councilor Conti was there,
Yes.
and I don't want to leave anyone else out, any of the councilors. I think Councilor Waterman, I think you may have been there,
Right.
right? That Saturday morning where we had that 8-hour session with the consultant. Yeah, that was part of the charrettes.
Right.
And yeah, that was a year ago, January, that we had that. So I'm sorry, I thought you meant from the date of the
That's all
plan,
right.
but that is part of the MVP and the hazard mitigation plan as well, both of them.
And of the many people who were there, I think the recommendation came up at least in more than one group about the wetlands, extending the wetlands protection zone. That's all, right? Do you remember that?
I remember, generally
Okay.
speaking, I can't say specifically, but we have all the notes, we have all the charrette markups and on the sheet. So I think it's safe to say yes, but I can't tell you categorically. I remember specifically.
All right. And just to establish that this was also, the city's comprehensive plan also envisions protecting and expanding green spaces in the city, doesn't it?
So the comprehensive plan does, as in my opinion, I think it's consistent, as I said during my presentation. The MVP, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Plan, the Pre-Disaster Hazard Mitigation Plan, and may also say that we'll be finishing up, hopefully soon, the Open Space Recreation Plan, and that also talks to a certain extent about wetlands preservation, well, not preservation, wetlands protection. I think there's a big difference between preservation and protection, and I think protection is the way to go. And I think that touches on it, but I don't want to bring it up now because it's in draft form and it's not going to really reference that right now.
So is it fair to say then that this idea has been perhaps, although the urgency may be new, is it fair to say that this idea has been kind of on the horizon for a while, this idea of possibly expanding the wetlands protection zone? Is that fair to say?
It's fair to say, and also let me also clarify too with Mayor Haru. He and I and Nick talk about land use policy often. And we bounce ideas around and he asks often, Gary, what else can we do? And let me also say that the mayor is working closely with the planning board on a number of initiatives for green, creating reduction of tree cutting. In the course of those discussions, he asks often, he doesn't just tell me, here's what I want to do. He'll say, what's your opinion? What are your thoughts? What do you think about this? In the normal course of discussion, we'll talk about protecting wetlands, and we'll talk about protecting the upland, which is part of the wetland. We've talked about a tree regulation for the subdivision regulations. We've also talked with the planning board and the mayor about maybe making that citywide and having a tree ordinance because I'm sorry.
Gary.
Okay.
We're an
I'm
hour,
sorry.
we're
All right.
27 minutes in.
Okay, sorry.
And I want to be mindful to others that have questions of, and I think Council Conti and Council Reynolds have questions of you. So before you go away, Council Conti. Council.
Thank you. Gary, I learned tonight that I really don't understand the differences in the jurisdiction between the WPZ and the buffer. So can you just, and I don't think I'm alone, but can you just delineate what the differences are in jurisdiction between the buffer from the state and the WPZ from the city?
Sure. So the 100-foot jurisdictional buffer yard under the state Wetlands Protection Act says from the very edge of the wetland, out 100 feet to an upland, any proposed development within that 100 feet, that's the buffer, requires a review of the commission. Now, that could be a full-blown notice of intent application, which means full-blown engineering, which means you're filing a notice of intent, or in the opinion of the applicant and his or her engineer, they may think that even though it's jurisdictional, it's within that buffer, that 100-foot state buffer, that they don't think that it actually requires a full-blown engineering and a notice of intent application. So what they'll do, and as I'm sure most of you may have heard, a term is called a request for a determination of applicability. So what they'll do is they'll file an application with the Conservation Commission and say, hey, look, I know we're in the buffer, but given what we want to do, we professionally do not think that it's going to have such an impact on the wetlands, and therefore we believe that we don't need to file a notice of intent. Would you agree and issue what is called a determination of applicability? That's in the negative. So you file a request for a determination of applicability, and the commission, if it agrees with you, would file a negative, which means even though you're inside that 100-foot buffer, the performance standards of the NOI, of the notice of intent, don't apply. So you could either apply for a notice of intent application or a request. The commission might conclude, Council Conti, that no, we disagree with you, issue a positive determination of applicability, in which case you would then have to file a notice of intent. So that's the 100-foot. What the local wetlands protection ordinance now is, if you want to go back to that document, I'm sorry I didn't get it to you earlier, and I will email these out to you, is the 25-foot WPZ, okay, is measured, the current one, let's just talk current so we could talk about actual optics, is measured from the edge of the wetland, just like the 100-foot buffer, but only out 25 feet. And what our local ordinance says is and this is just Gary talking for me, just general comment, we want you not to encroach in this, we want you to stay out of this area. So you've got 75 feet to play with inside that buffer. However, we have provisions in the ordinance and the regulations that say, our desire to maintain that 25-foot WPZ cannot be categorically across the board in every instance applied. There are going to be certain circumstances, very practical circumstances, that's going to require some type of a projection or an intrusion into that. So in the section, as I said earlier, and I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record, but in section 4.2 and 4.9.4, permanent disturbance and discretionary waiver, you could ask the commission to say, look, I know we're supposed to stay out of it, but given these conditions or this situation, we believe a deviation from your 25-foot PZ so that we're actually even closer to the wetlands, you're inside that 25, we think it's merited. That's the difference, Councilor Carney. I think when I give you this graphic, I hope that'll just make it a little clearer. And I'm sorry, again, I didn't get this out to you sooner. But again, the 25-foot WPZ is inside the 100-foot, and they're both measured off the edge of the wetland line. It's just with the local 25-foot WPZ, the performance standards to work in it are greater, more stringent than it would be in the balance of the other 75 feet.
Thank you, Gary. That clears it up. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. And for Gary and the council, it's clear to me that Gary and Nick will likely be invited to at least one, probably more, meetings of the committee in order to answer some of the more granular questions that we're sort of getting into.
Be happy to.
There's 31 attendees on the Zoom meeting tonight, and I don't want to limit our questions, but the council will have plenty of opportunity for questions of Gary. So if you have any now, please ask them, but I don't want to spend another hour of Gary answering questions because I do want to hear from the public on this matter this evening, which we may have to continue that public testimony based on how much time we use. So with that, I'll recognize Council Reynolds.
So I just have one question right now. I have multiple ones, but I'm saying if the whole reason, Gary, for this increase is basically to further protect the environment, but permits and variances can still be applied for and maybe would be granted. What really, I guess my ask is, what really is the need for expanding that when we can do this already? Because it kind of says to me that it's just more red tape and an intrusion on the landowner.
Okay, so I think that's the same question that Council President Mark Cooper asked. So I'm going to say the same thing. So first of all, I respectfully disagree, and I hope that's okay to do so. I don't think it is red tape. And I don't think it's an intrusion, no pun intended. But remember, what I said was, even though all forms of development, planning board, zoning board, and Concom, all forms of development, there are regulations that actually tell the public, the developer, the applicant, you may ask for a waiver from the strict compliance of an ordinance or a regulation. That's in every document we read. Okay, so why then, Gary, should we impose a greater WPZ to 75 feet if you're telling me that not only does the commission have the latitude to allow that work, the discretionary work, but in fact, the numbers you've showed us show us that they actually do grant those in the vast majority of times? Well, the answer again, Councilor Reynolds, is the answer I gave to Council President is because from a public policy standpoint, the point is that we want to start off with that 75 foot as a public policy that we'd prefer not to have any work in that WPZ for all the reasons that Nick articulated earlier, the scientific reasons and the academic reasons. So that's the default. The default is we'd prefer not to see that. And hopefully when you read the documents, you will infer that. Now, whether you agree with it or not, I'm not suggesting that, but hopefully you'll see that conclusion. So once you have the 75 feet, whether or not the Conservation Commission grants the relief you're asking, the waiver, or the discretionary waiver, or the variance, whatever you want to call it, which is a deviation from the performance standard, is independent of the statement that the city of Attleboro preserves and maintains a 75-foot setback because it chooses to, because it's good public policy. Whether or not the commission then allows or disallows work in that is discretionary, but it understands that there's a higher review and higher performance standard to do the work, Council Reynolds, in that additional 50 feet that would normally be allowed under the current ordinance, which is 25 feet. So the answer really relies on why 75 feet. It's not, and again, I shouldn't be asking, I'm not saying, your question is faulty. Your question is not faulty. My answer to the question is, using the information that Nick supplied, is it's good public policy that it should be 75 feet, because that 75 feet affords more effective protection. That upland affords more protection on the wetland than the 25 feet. And the fact that we could grant the waiver is a good thing.
So I understand what you're saying, and I guess good public policy could be questioned by the landowner versus,
of course,
making the policy. So either way, I will hold my questions
Okay.
next time, and so we can allow the people that are here.
Okay. And that also give everyone else an opportunity to read those documents as well, so we could really get down to the nitty gritty. So.
Thank you. I had Vice President Jackson next up. I'll go to, oh, you are there. You're muted. You're muted, Kate.
All set right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any Council Waterman?
Yes, I have a quick one, Gary. Thank you for coming tonight and
My pleasure.
being so patient with us.
It's okay.
I suspect that there are a number of those 31 people that are waiting who are already homeowners who have been in the city for a number of years, maybe some of them 20 or 30 years owning their own property under the 25-foot rule. Is there anything that you would want to say to them now before they begin to talk with you about how this will affect what they have already built between 75 and 25 feet?
Sure. And that then I'm going to have to refer back to the portion of the proposed amendments that talks about.
So, Gary, I'm just going to pause us there for 1 second.
Okay.
I think I appreciate the question, Council Waterman, but I think that the answer could be a long one. And I want to be respectful of the community that has come to speak on this matter. But Gary, I think it's reasonable with Nick's email response to include an initial email response to the question, and then answer it more broadly, or if more questions come as a result of your answer, you could be prepared to ask. We could be prepared to ask, and you could be prepared to answer at that time.
More than happy to. Okay.
Okay.
We'll defer that at this time.
It's fine.
Any additional questions for Gary? Gary, thanks again.
All right, folks.
And we'll see you again.
Okay.
Are there any questions for the mayor? Okay. Mayor, Councilor Blair. We'll give the mayor and Gary a minute to.
Change scenes.
Hey guys, how are you?
Good.
Hero, thank you for being here tonight.
Of course.
I have a feeling, because I've heard you speak on development in an adverse way, that if you had your way, there'd never be another tree cut down in Attleboro. And you pushing for this 75 feet proposal, because it did come from your request from your office, right? Am I correct?
The idea came from Gary. I got the idea from Gary. He gave me ideas, and this was one of them. So, and then much like with anything I submit to the council, the ideas more than 99% of the time come from a department head. But then, yes, it comes from my office.
That isn't the answer Gary gave, but we won't go into that.
No, that is the answer. That it is a consistent.
We're not getting into it. So we're not getting into it. Doesn't.
No, I'm not getting, I'm just asking a question.
So what's your clarifying question, Councilor Blair? Because it's before us today, where it came from at this point, who cares? So whether
So this is what I'm asking the mayor. This isn't a personal agenda then.
I'm not sure what you mean. Making Attleboro a cleaner, greener place is something I campaigned on. As I said in my testimony, it is something that I've heard over and over again, knocking on doors, that people are tired of the clear cutting. And when I approached Gary about what we can do about that, this is one of the ideas that he gave me. In the process of researching this, I discovered there were a lot more benefits to expanding the WPZ. For example, I didn't even understand how a buffer zone like this WPZ is more effective as we increase the width. Quite frankly, before I got this idea, I didn't even know what a WPZ was, and that's why I rely on someone like Gary and Nick to educate me about ways we can make Attleboro a cleaner, greener place. As I said in my testimony, this council has advanced a lot of things that I have pushed for within the city, and to make Attleboro a cleaner, greener place. This is another one of those proposals. If I could see to it that no other trees would be cut down in the city, yeah, I would like that. But that's not realistic. That's not what's going to happen. You still have to advance policies and ideas that have a chance of passing. And that's why when the first iteration of this I submitted, I think 14 months ago or 16 months ago, was pulled back because it really didn't have any exemptions at all. And Gary recognized that, Nick recognized that, the Conservation Commission recognized that. And they said, Paul, if you want this to pass, you've got to allow for some exemptions, and to protect some homeowners' rights. And I said, good, I'll take what I can get. And so that's why we are where we are now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Vice President Jackson.
Thank you, President Cooper. Can we move on to because we have so much going on tonight, it's kind of getting late. Can we move on to those in favor, those not in favor?
That's next.
Thank you ever so kindly.
As long as there's no additional questions for the mayor.
Oh.
Mayor, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. I'm going to mute myself and shut off the camera now. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone here? And I want people to, first of all, let me say this. It's 8:43. It's getting late.
Yeah.
We can go through in favor and opposed and neither for nor against tonight, but I am going to cut it off at 10 p.m. and then we will continue the public hearing to another evening. So if you have life events happening now and you can't give your testimony this evening because it is getting so late, you will have an opportunity. You will not have an opportunity to approach the council a second time, but you will have an opportunity to provide your testimony, whether you're for, against, or neither for nor against, at another meeting of the council when we continue this public hearing. We will not close it tonight. That said, I would take is there anyone here to speak in favor?
President Cooper, Mike Davis of 99 Thayer Farm Road would like to speak in favor of the ordinance.
Thank you. Mr. Davis, you are on.
Is that better?
It sure is. I can hear you now.
There we go. Excellent. Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity. I did want to add my voice to many others in support of this proposal to increase the wetland buffer an additional 50 feet. We are all really quite aware that wetlands serve to store and purify water, mitigate flooding, buffer stormwater runoff, control erosion, and recharge water resources. Further, since wetlands serve as a natural filter, water treatment uses fewer chemicals and reduces the burden on very expensive water treatment facilities. Now, I fully understand that we acquire most of our water from surface supplies. However, much of that water reaches those surface locations by way of aquifers and groundwater plumes that are fed by wetlands. That's how the water cycle works. Those flow mechanics are the very issue that I studied for 7 years for a master's thesis when assessing the Superfund site in Woburn, Mass. So whether the source is in our own city or in a surrounding town, the groundwater needs to be protected. Groundwater does not appreciate property lines. As a taxpayer for more than 36 years, I also fully understand that we pay for a portion of our water from surrounding towns. And if those sources are no longer available because of changes in state or local allocations, or the water cycle disruptions from very real and very unpredictable issues of climate change, we're going to be left to fend for ourselves. So as the city grows, we need that growth to be sustainable. In other words, we need to make sure that we have an adequate supply of clean water, with current residents as the first priority. We should not jeopardize the quality of our water and the rights to that water earmarked for current citizens over future development. Developers simply need to figure out how to deal with this ordinance, just as they have with other land development and building regulations. I think the Planning Department Director, Gary Erasian, gave developers an effective roadmap on how to efficiently use the land and avoid the wetlands altogether. This roadmap and the ordinance language represents plenty of compromises to approve this ordinance. Water is a security issue. If we don't protect the nursery of our water resources, we will be left to suffer those consequences. Because once the wetland is gone, it's gone forever. I hope that you will vote to support this ordinance change, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mike. Is there anyone here with any questions for Mr. Davis? Mike, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else to speak in favor?
President Cooper, Laura Abrams would like to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you, members of the council. I would like to speak in favor of this ordinance because, as Mike had just said, freshwater is a concern, and it is something that is valuable and precious, and we have to protect it. But also, you know, we live, as the mayor sort of alluded to earlier as well, you know, this is not something that's just for us, it's for future generations as well. And we need to protect what we have. And I feel that, you know, it's not just fresh water, but also wildlife that depends on it. There was a study, I'm sorry, not a study, but there was a story in the New York Times maybe about a year or 2 years ago about beavers sort of changing the local ecology for the better, actually, because it increased diversity of fish, it allowed for water life to sort of flourish, as well as protected the banks as well. And when we start encroaching on those in that buffer zone, we take away from that, and we leave less of those resources for future generations. So thank you. That's what I have to say. I hope that the council will vote in favor of this ordinance.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Abrams? Thank you very much.
President Cooper, for the record, Laura Abrams lives at 35 Cumberland Street.
Oh, thank you for that.
Okay. Next to speak is Roxanne Houghton of 13 Eisenhower Street.
Good evening. Ms. Houghton, the floor is yours.
Good evening. Roxanne Houghton, 13 Eisenhower Street. First thing I'd like to say is that I'm in support of this proposal. I actually was on the council when the Wetland Protection Act was first introduced, discussed, and passed. And I'd just like to mention a couple things. There was a person from the EPA, actually he lived in Attleboro at the time, and he spoke at the public hearing that we had in 2001. He suggested to the council that with the soil natures of Borough, we needed a 200-foot wetland buffer. We got 25 feet. The planning board at that time actually led the charge for our Wetland Protection Act. And they fought tooth and nail for at least a 50-foot buffer. I think that they had a lot more oversight on what would happen through the years with development and so forth. But they did understand and made very clear that the 25 feet was not enough even at that time. And this is very well documented. But whatever, that was a different time, 2001, and we knew a lot less about the value of wetlands and the role they would play in the quality of life and health issues of the future. Which brings us to 2021 and the tremendous development of our city. We live in a time and place where every single piece of land is precious, not only for us, but for future generations. We've heard from the city planner, Gary Arasian, and our conservation agent, Nick Wiley, are extremely knowledgeable experts on the subject and tonight. Our world in 2021 has a much more complete understanding of the value of our wetlands. In the past couple of years, the council and our city has engaged in several very public discussions regarding the importance of clean, healthy water for our residents. A couple of years back, the entire city became concerned when our drinking water had some sort of an issue going on. People were really upset about that, as was this council. The council and city residents wanted this resolved. We all understand the importance of safe, healthy water. You, the city council, rightfully wanted to know what had to be done to fix this. Well, tonight, we have another very important tool that's being discussed, a tool that directly ties to keeping our drinking water safe and healthy. You, the 11 people that have been elected and trusted to make decisions for 45,000 people of this city, are being given an opportunity to make a commitment to our clean water for us and our kids, our grandkids, and every generation after that. When I was writing this today, I was thinking about an election that took place a few years ago. It wasn't Attleboro, but it was a close town. And there was a big issue about people couldn't afford to heat their homes. The state was debating whether to give a big grant to self-help so that they could help families in Attleboro out with their heating bills. And there was one particular candidate that talked a lot about how people needed help and there needed to be a solution. And then the election ended and a vote was taken at the State House, and that same person voted against giving money to the organization to help people out. And I look at this and I see, we've all talked about Attleboro and our water issues or whatever that we could have or had have. And if people are really sincerely concerned about this, this is a tool. And elected officials aren't just elected to take care of today. We depend on you, 11 of you, to make educated and caring decisions for us in the city. And what was healthy for us in 2001 isn't for 2021. This is our drinking water we're talking about, not something insignificant. In my opinion, the only thing that should be discussed is the well-being of 45,000 residents and future generations of the city. A while back, there was a public hearing for an issue in South Attleboro. And I just happened to be watching that night, the public hearing. Watched some women speak. They were very courteous and concerned. They were concerned about their children and their families. And what really stood out to me was the number of people that actually came to the council meeting to express the concern about their children. And one of the women that spoke said something, and it grabbed my ear. She said, "I'm concerned about the quality of life that our children are going to inherit in the future." The quality of life. She understood very clearly the role that this council plays and the responsibility that this role carries. I didn't know this woman, never met her, whatever, but given it's 2021, she contacted me on Facebook because she knew that I was interested in these issues. And as we were chit-chatting, she said to me, "Did they hear us? meaning the council. And I gave her an honest answer. I said, I don't know, but I hope so. Because I know what you're talking about when you're talking about your kids and a quality of life. And I spoke to a few of the counselors about this conversation with this woman. And it was mostly women concerned with the future and so forth. Some of it stemming from the pollution. We're talking about pollution and so forth. The council's dealing with a lot of public stuff about quality of life stuff now. And the massive surge in development in clean water. But these are real issues. And I guess I'm asking that you hear us as well. And in not many years from now, most of the land in the city is going to be developed. We're not going to have this opportunity to make this decision that's before us today because it's already going to have been made for us. And our wetlands, there's no question that they need more protection, not only for our drinking water, but for the role they play in sustaining a healthy and varied biodiversity. Should we leave our kids a city that's home to no other species than ourselves? You know, is that fair to our kids? In our schools, we have a teacher, actually, she lives near me, who are very concerned about this issue. In one school that I know of, a teacher and her class watch out for, they kind of overlook, they oversee a vernal pool that's on the school property. And the teacher is actually using this as a teaching tool for her kids. The kids love it. They love being taught about this. And they want to protect it. They think it's a treasure. But the reality is our kids have no power. They have no power to protect anything. You do, and we do. I mean, shall we remove all wetland biological education because there won't be anything left? Every day we lose hundreds of species, many of whom count on our wetlands for survival. Lots of mammals, lots of different species. I won't go into all of them, but hundreds of them. And we have a responsibility to leave something behind, something healthy, diverse, and important. You have a responsibility to 45,000 people, not just to one group. This is our home, all of us, not just a few of us. And we, in favor of this proposal, really are asking for very little, an extra 50 feet of earth, not to gain anything, not to make us richer, not to give us anything, but a healthy, sustainable environment. And when the last proposal was sent down, there were issues, and the mayor did address those, as did our conservation agent. And this is a fair proposal, one that's worthy of a passage by this honorable body. I'm just about finished, and to walk away from this would be tragic for the city because we're never going to have this chance again. In closing, I would like to add that, ask that this proposal be accepted by the council. And I would like to see the respect that this acceptance would reflect on 45,000 people in our city, our conservation department, our organizations such as the 10 Mile River, our land trust, the different organizations that put their heart and soul into keeping this a healthy city. One last thing I want to say after listening to what we've heard so far tonight. I would respectfully request that the council not only look at this through the eyes of development, because that's not the only thing it involves. I would ask that you look through it, try to look through the eyes of 45,000 human being communities and our quality of life. The issue is broader than development. It's our life here in this city and the life of our kids and our grandchildren. And my last comment is going to be that, and Councilor Cooper touched on this, I don't want this issue to be the end result of it to become petty because we're going to worry about who proposed it. That's not fair to us, and we deserve better than to have a decision made on whatever personal conflicts are going on. And that would be my final statement, and I thank you for the chance to speak.
Sorry about that. Ms. Houghton, thank you for joining this evening. Any questions for Ms. Houghton? I saw Councilor Holmes. Did you have a question?
I just wanted to thank Roxanne for showing up, and I feel like she's always very passionate about these issues, and I appreciate her comments.
Thank you. Any additional questions for Ms. Houghton? Roxanne, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Mark.
Okay, President Cooper, Tanuja Arani of 54 Todd Drive would like to speak in favor.
Great. Thank you. Tanuja, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can. Thank you.
So thanks for allowing me to speak. I'm speaking in favor of the change in ordinance. I grew up in Attleboro, and I've lived actually in the Pacific Northwest, which was referenced in the scientific studies this evening and that were mentioned. And sometimes, especially living for a few years in rural Oregon, I realize I can see what the shape is of the land there. And you can really see the wetlands, you can see rivers, you can see mountains. And I realized growing up in Attleboro that I don't really know what the land looks like. Attleboro is twice as old as Oregon. And as a state, Oregon's only been around for 150 years. And so I think that it's important to preserve landscape that we have that's natural. And then wetlands and their buffers are so important because the water connects all of us. So this proposed ordinance change really encourages us to be good land stewards, promotes the use of native plants, aims to keep chemicals out of the water, and really forces us to think about how we treat animals and how we're living with them. And then also it's good to align with the state's 100 feet requirement. There's so many thoughtful allowed minor activities and exemptions, and I hope that the council will vote in favor of this ordinance. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Tanuja at this time? Thank you so much.
President Cooper, Brian Hatch of 34 Silver Birch Road would like to speak in favor.
Thank you. Mr. Hatch is still muted.
Good evening, councilors. I provided a letter of support in favor of the amendments before the hearing, which I listed a number of different points. I'll try to summarize some of those now, but I'm definitely in favor of the amendments, and some of the points I'll mention that draws from my experience as an Attleboro Conservation Commissioner, member of the Board of Directors of the Attleboro Land Trust, and as an attorney responsible for drafting of municipal ordinances or bylaws which are concerned with environmental issues. And what we're concerned with is looking at the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act, which creates the initial buffer zone of 100 feet and allows municipalities the discretion to go and set their own standards below that. And you've got to look at the goals of that Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act, and that's to protect wetlands from the harmful effects of encroachment of human activity. And among those main goals, the protection of public and private water supply, protection of groundwater supply, flood control, storm damage prevention, prevention of pollution, protection of fisheries, and protection of wildlife habitat. Now, many of the cities and towns in Massachusetts have instituted the 25-foot no disturb zone, and this has helped the city in preventing some of the harmful effects of pollutants from surface water runoff from developed upland areas to wetlands, and which have an important role in cleansing groundwater, water supplies, preventing storm damage, and protection of endangered wildlife, such as the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act emphasizes. And numerous other municipalities in Massachusetts have higher no disturb or no build zones. However, the 25-foot buffer, which the present Attleboro ordinance has been codified that has been codified has been found by scientific evidence confirmed by other conservation commissions in their consideration of the buffer zone bylaws to be insufficient in many respects. For example, in the town of Tewksbury, Massachusetts Conservation Commission's bylaw subcommittee's review of wetland buffer zone distances, they quoted the Environmental Law Institute Planner's Guide to Wetland Buffers, which said that buffers of 25 feet or less did not function to reduce disturbance to adjacent wetland. And the same study indicated that buffers up to 50 feet were susceptible to degradation from human disturbance. Now, as a result, I want to point out there are a lot of urbanized municipalities like Attleboro and even more urbanized, which have the 75-foot wetland protection zone. And that includes, I found that the city of Nashua, New Hampshire, which is a population of 90,323 and has 41% more persons per square mile than Attleboro. That is one of the cities that I found had a 75-foot buffer zone. One of the things that the council probably consider is that, of course, there are people that would like to have a practical avenue to take care of financial advantage of a larger land parcel they have or unneeded acreage by selling off for development or human use. And the thing I want to point out with, and I've run into this practically serving on the Conservation Commission, is that Gary Oration and Nick Wiley have mentioned some very good exemptions and also variations that the Conservation Commission can take into account and also allow for activity, minor activities that might fall into the local wetlands regulations, but are specifically considered exempt from the restrictions because they present no adverse impact on the resource areas protected under the ordinance. And there's also a possibility that residents can present a case for hardship, and the Conservation Commission must consider that. Overall, the benefits to the residents of these amendments to the ordinance of the protection of a vitally important resource that impacts water supply, wildlife habitats, and quality of life will be significant and will increase the value of residing in Attleboro. The council's approval will put the city of Attleboro at the forefront of communities which recognize that the property of its landowners is even more valuable when environmental considerations are properly weighed in decisions on land use. Therefore, I urge the councilors to consider passage of the proposed amendments as a priority to show their constituents that their goal is to continue the improvements Attleboro has made in making the city a modern, vibrant community which views impacts to its environment as a crucial part of ongoing development. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Hatch at this time? Thank you very much. Is there anyone else here to speak in favor?
President Cooper, Roy Belcher of 6 Nancy Ave would like to speak in favor of the ordinance.
Thank you.
President Cooper, can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you for giving me a chance to speak. I'm speaking tonight as a representative of the Attleboro Land Trust. Over a year ago, our board learned of this revised ordinance and voted unanimously to send a letter of support endorsing the ordinance, and a copy of that letter has been submitted. The explanation this evening, I thought, has exposed an excellent revision, which includes plenty of flexibility for future development while increasing the protection of our very important natural resources. Our wetlands are a finite resource, and as development has increased over the decades, those wetlands are under increased pressure from street runoff, from septic systems, backyard pools, and other contaminants that flow into the wetlands. So having an extra 50 feet of protection will go a long way toward preserving them. I'm not going to take up more time because I think you'll have my letter. I just would like to thank again the mayor, Gary Arazian and Nick Wiley, for doing an excellent job of finding a way to make this palatable so that we can maintain a balance between future development and environmental protection. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Belcher? Thanks again.
President Cooper, Gary Crofta of 7 Prospect Street would like to speak in favor of the ordinance.
Great. Thank you. Gary, can you hear us okay?
I'm pressing a button. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. I submitted a letter to the council for you to read. I don't know if you've gotten it. I guess I could read through it. Have you got it? Did you get it?
Yes.
We got it. We did get it.
Out loud for everyone, or
I don't think you need to, Gary. I think if you have something else.
Something else, because a lot of what everyone has said has covered a lot of what I've written. It's just to summarize quickly, I am always out in the woods doing explorations. I'm certifying vernal pools, and I see the result of having only 25 feet protecting a wetland, and a lot of times I see where it just isn't working, particularly in the form of algae blooms in a pond or in a pool or in a swamp near where the houses are. I see it all the time, and I could show that. I can show anybody who wants to see anytime, whenever the blooms are coming. There is another issue that has come to my mind, and then I remember about 6 years ago, the city commissioned a water quality study of Mechanics Pond, and I don't know if any of you remember this. I looked for my copy of it here at home, and I could not find it. I lost it somewhere. I knew I had it about a year ago or so, but I cannot find it. But I know the city hired an engineering firm to study the water quality of Mechanics Pond. And what they found was their conclusion was that there was excessive submerged plant growth and blooms of algae, including toxic blue-green algae. This is in Mechanics Pond. And it was being strangled, basically, was the summary. And the report included a number of recommendations: dredging, rediversion of the flow.
Gary, I just want to redirect you to this ordinance. I think we're all familiar.
Okay.
Some more than others with the challenges of anything that has to happen or.
Okay, well, I have the point I'm trying to make is if the city were to go into the everything that was suggested was an expensive proposition. Who would be paying for that? If we had to do an aeration system, we had to do dredging.
Gary, I'm going to stop you again.
Who live around the pond who have.
Point of order.
Gary,
yes.
Gary, please. What additional testimony, other than your letter that you submitted, do you want to offer with regard to why the city should increase the wetlands protection zone from 25 to 75 feet?
Okay, well, the wetland protection zone around Mechanics Pond, 25 foot, did not protect Mechanics Pond from algae blooms. The 25-foot protection zone, wetland protection zone, does not protect. It's from what we've seen, what I've seen personally in the woods, in my excursions into the native area, natural areas, and it's what we've seen, and from the city's point of view of having to deal with algae blooms from the fact that there's not enough protection around Mechanics Pond. I don't know. I guess that's probably all I would need to say. I wonder who's going to pay for it if we decide that we have to do something.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Crofter at this time?
Thank you, Gary. Say hi to Betsy.
I will.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm done.
President Cooper, Bill Larson would like to speak against the
So
motion.
we're in favor at the moment. So
I have no other.
no one else, there's no one else to speak in favor.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Anyone to speak in opposition? I heard you say Bill Larson
Yeah,
first.
Bill Larson of 142 Fairway Drive would like to speak against.
Good evening, President Cooper and members of the Municipal Council. Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you in opposition to the proposed ordinance this evening. I've tried to look at this a couple different ways to be fair and balanced about it. The additional 50 feet comes up into most of my backyard and would take over a fair amount of the trees in my backyard. As you're aware, I own a company at 90 Olive Street. This additional 50 feet comes right across the entrance to my parking lot. It encompasses my sheds. It encompasses both of my power supplies. At some point with this additional 50 feet, you are actually in my building. So obviously I have concerns about that. My wife and I also have concerns. We own a parcel of land in Attleboro. And when I measure the creek that goes through that piece of property, and I take 50 feet on both sides of that creek, because that's what the mayor is proposing. The mayor is now changing 3 acres of land that my wife and I own. But I don't want this to be about me or just me. So I took the time to look at a map of the city. And when you look at all the different rivers and creeks that go through the city, you've obviously got the Bungie, the 7 mile, the 10 mile, you've got Chartley Brook, you've got Thatcher Brook, you've got Bliss Brook. And for the most part, all of these rivers and tributaries have frontage that's owned by private citizens. And so when you look at all this mileage of rivers, and by my estimation, it's just over 10 miles of waterways, and you look at an additional 100 feet, because that's both sides of the river, you are basically looking at 528,000 square feet for every mile. So for 12 miles, you'd be looking at, at 10 miles, you'd be looking at taking over or changing 120 acres of land in the city. And just to put that in perspective, 120 acres is 3 times the size of Capron Park Zoo and the park itself. And these people are just getting, a little bit more control taken away from them as to what, they can do with their land. And I enjoyed listening to Mr. Arazian's presentation. I enjoyed talking with Mr. Arazian quite a bit. And something struck me in his presentation, and President Cooper, you kind of picked up on part of it. So there's been 43 applications to work inside that 25-foot zone, if I remember his presentation correctly. And the conservation had approved 42 of them. So what difference, if they're approving 42 out of 43 at 25 feet, and you use that as a standard, going to 75 feet doesn't make any sense because they're already approving 42 out of 43 at 25 feet. And in addition to that, part of the testimony tonight was that by state guidelines and law, 100 feet, if you're within 100 feet, there are already policies and procedures in place so that you can't do anything without getting either, a letter of determination or an order of conditions. So there's already things in place that are preventing and controlling what people do within 100 feet of the wetlands. And our local jurisdiction is already approving 42 out of 43 applications inside of 25 feet. So in my opinion, the argument for 75 feet then just goes away. Now, I'll say that the environment is very, very important. It's very important to everybody. I don't think anyone would ever say that the environment is not important, and that clean drinking water obviously is very important. But I think this is an overreach on the city's part. And I think it's to a certain extent, I do believe it's a land grab, even though I was told tonight that it's not. I don't think it's fair, and I don't think it's right. Because I think there's enough in place already to take care of what people want protected. And I thank you very much for your time and for listening. And I hope all of you have a good night.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Larson? Bill, thank you.
President Cooper, Joseph Cabanegro would like to speak against the ordinance.
Thank you.
Good evening, President Cooper and members of the council. My name is Joseph Cabanegro, and I reside at 903 Pike Avenue. Just a little highlight. I've been working with wetlands and with the Wetlands Protection Act since it was known as the Hatch Act. I remember the conservation meetings over in the industrial building on Union Street. I also want to, mention my home is located on Pike Avenue, and I have a 3-season stream that runs around it. And the closest my home is to part of the stream is about 30 feet. I do have like a 6-foot buffer that I've established in between it. And I would like to invite any member of the council that would like to see how homes can live be situated near wetlands without harming it. I think I have shown that, and I've raised 3 children here. They've had fun, and there's been no harm to the wetlands. I do understand some of the restrictions that have to be put on, and I understand some of the reasons why the original 25-foot was put in, because some things are being abused, but I do not think that it has to be increased up to 75 feet. I would like to break my objections down, though, into 2 sections, one being existing homes and existing lots. And I'm going to use my own home as an example. I recently asked for permission to put a shed in. It was actually a couple of years ago. I've procrastinated on putting the shed in. With the price of lumber today, quite honestly, I wanted to wait a little longer. But the shed was going to be 42 feet away from the 3-season stream, the edge of the wetlands. And the RDA was granted by the Conservation Commission. However, it was located just off my driveway that was slightly into the wooded area. And so if the new 75-foot was put in with the conditions, it was only allowing, as far as conditions that I have printed out, being on existing lawn. I think if you do vote to do the 75 feet, that should be changed to give existing homeowners in existing lots more of a possibility of not just existing lawn on their lot. We still have to go through conservation to show that the mitigation is would be warranted and get their permission. But I think that should be changed. Also, it's my understanding on the original ordinance that was passed in 2000 as far as one, that there was no waiver policy. I respect the Conservation Commission and the Planning Board for coming up with the allowing the waivers, as was mentioned in 42 out of the 43. But if this is going to be allowed, that those exceptions would be allowed, such as the addition of additions or decks or sheds or like that, there should be specific waiver language or variance language put into the ordinance, which I may be wrong, but I do not think it exists. And just speaking of those 42 or 43 approved, I don't know how much of those were approved for actually building a new house or an addition into the 25-foot the WPZ. Again, I may be wrong, but it was my understanding that at least that most of those were for repair of septic systems or other things that just couldn't, be done with some sort of allowance. And I just want to go on to undeveloped land now, which is a hot subject. The developers do not make any more money based on this 25 or this or the 75 foot. It's always implied that it's the developers that are fighting it. The land that as far as the developers buy, and I've done in the past, is land owned by the citizens or a citizen of Attleboro. And it is the responsibility of the developer when we make an agreement with the citizen to purchase that land. It's usually by X amount of dollars per lot. So that, and I'm picking a figure, if there's 20 lots, they get $200,000. It's a lot more these days. But if it's 30 lots, they get $300,000. So by putting a 75, increasing the 25 to 75, and but it would be cutting down the value of the land to that landowner in Attleboro, not the developer. And I also question on Gary's, and I'd like to meet with him on his fourth chart, where he was saying there was 183 houses or something like that, and according to him, it would go down to maybe only affecting 7 lots. I can't see how that figure is accurate. I would be thinking it's more of his first column that had 29 lots in it. Because again, going back to the engineer, it's the engineer and the surveyor's responsibility to maximize the lots to give the best value for the landowner, and the developer pays it on that. And I don't know the exact price of the lots in today's Attleboro when you are as far as developing land, but I bet you it's about $50,000 per lot that these landowners are getting. That is on a subdivision lot where roads and water and sewer and everything else have to be put in. So basically, based on the 29 lots that Gary mentioned, times $50,000 per lot, and it could be more. And I think it probably is more. Speaking that by instituting this, should be taken over approximately $1.45 million away from the citizen of Attleboro. If the city thinks, yes, it's the proper thing to do because we want this greener city, then those citizens should be compensated for their loss of land. It's just not right that the city can just come in and say, we are putting this law in and you're going to lose value as far as in your land, but we really don't care. And that's, I know the mayor mentioned that it isn't socialism, but unfortunately, I think that is socialism when you say to the landowner, we don't care what you want, but we're going to do it anyways. So I would advocate, again, just following up, that existing homes and existing lots be given some added protection, saying that, as Councilor Blair was saying, that it's not that you may do this, but you shall do this, but because so long as it is shown that proper precautions are being taken place. And if in the case of subdivisions this is put through, then there has been some mechanism to compensate these citizens of Attleboro who own this land from losing value in the land, and as well as individual lots. And I'll just mention, I forgot to mention this, I still own a lot that in Attleboro that, based on the 25 foot, we couldn't put a backyard in it. So I says, well, because the septic system had to go in front, which was a 55-foot setback instead of as far as a normal 30 or 32-foot setback. So I said, well, we'll just hold on to the lot for some time until city surge goes by, and we can push the house farther forward to give a little backyard. If this 75 foot goes out as far as gets passed, I can't see how anybody's going to give a variance to put a house in that 75 foot. It isn't the purpose. And so that lot that I own is going to be unbuildable. What do I do with it then, with all the costs I've gone through and the taxes I've paid? Again, there has to be a difference between existing land, existing lots and existing houses and the subdivided land if you do go forward with this. And if there's any questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe. Any questions for Mr. Caponegro at this time? Thank you.
I would also ask President Cooper, and I know this is an abnormality, but if in the continued public hearings, there is new information presented by those in favor, that I think anybody that's opposed should be able to respond to any sort of like a rebuttal type thing.
So, Joe, as you know, it's not a debate, right? It's a public testimony. You can submit.
Oh, I understand what you're saying. Then yes, okay. I'm sorry.
Written testimony, Joe, if you want to. But testimony before the council is limited to once.
I stand, I understood that. I think I requested this before some other council hearing, and I was mistaken on the approach. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here to speak in opposition?
President Cooper, William Ward of 60 Ridgewood Road would like to speak against the ordinance.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Cooper, for allowing me to speak tonight. I know some people on the council probably know me. I'm a local builder. Over the past couple of days, I had prepared a letter that I submitted to the council earlier today. Unfortunately, I'm not technically savvy enough to actually put up the illustrations that I accompanied that letter, but members of the council will obviously have those illustrations in with the letter that I prepared. I've been listening to a lot of impassioned arguments for the extension of the Wetlands Protection Zone. Some of them are very good. I'm almost feeling guilty a little bit as I about to read this letter that I wrote, but I'm in the home building business, and I think this will significantly impact my particular industry. If you give me a second here, I'd like to read into the record the letter that I had written. Dear President Cooper, I am writing in response to the proposed changes to the local wetlands bylaw that will likely have a significant effect on the home building and land development businesses here in Attleboro. I've been building homes in Attleboro for nearly 35 years and always cognizant of the costs associated with building homes here in Attleboro. Over the past year, I've experienced an unexpected run-up in the cost of materials to build new homes because of the shortened supply of materials available to purchase. While much of the supply chain issue has been the result of the COVID virus, it is a good example of what the proposed regulations are likely to do to the value of land available for development and ultimately the cost of a building lot in Attleboro. It's very simple. If you shorten the supply of land available for development by imposing regulations that it's so restrictive, the cost of a buildable lot will likely increase and ultimately the cost of a new home in Attleboro. In reviewing the proposed regulation changes, I went back to my records to find a letter that I had sent previously to this body just over 20 years ago. At that time, there was no local wetlands bylaw, and all the wetlands regulations were essentially the minimum standards provided by the state of Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act. The Conservation Commission essentially could only apply the minimum standards while reviewing a project. The impetus for the local wetlands protection ordinance at that time was born out of the frustration that people were pushing the envelope when it came to what was a buildable lot. At the time, the proposal was for a 50-foot no disturb zone from the bordering vegetated wetland when there was no setback or protection zone at all. I can remember an example where a builder had to set a ladder over the top of the siltation barrier in order to install siding on a house that was being built. I agreed at that time, and today still agree, that is certainly pushing the envelope. After a couple of years of wrangling over the issue, it was finally agreed that a 25-foot no disturb zone would be appropriate. When projects are reviewed currently, there is a line that is, I call in the sand, at the 25-foot no disturb zone. Most applicants are asked to move a structure to at least 50 feet setback from the bordering vegetated wetland in order to have perhaps a 25-foot rear yard behind a home. Under the proposed regulations, a 75-foot no disturb zone will most likely put any type of structure 100 feet away from the bordering vegetated wetlands, in my opinion, excessive and without merit. There's a section of this letter that I really can't get into, but it discusses some of the illustrations. There are, I believe, 4 illustrations that I've attached with that letter that basically show you what the impact would be on a typical house. I use some septic systems in home building plans that I had done over the past couple of years, and just superimposed what a 75-foot setback would look like on those particular lots. And it's pretty drastic. As I continue with this letter, most of the properties available today in Attleboro for development of single-family homes do not have municipal sewer. Joe Caponegro had indicated earlier, municipal sewer is not readily available in every section of the city. So it requires, the septic system requires to be installed in the front of the home, and typically requires that house to be set back significant distance. So it just makes it tougher and tougher to build a house on a particular lot. With setbacks increasing to perhaps 75 feet, it is problematic. My point in providing these illustrations is to show members of the council the impact likely to be caused by the proposed excessive setback distance. You could have a building lot with no wetlands on it at all and be prevented from developing the lot due to the setback distance. While the proposed ordinance change provides a relief to existing properties currently built, it provides no grandfathering or relief to any new construction project. This ordinance change is simply being directed at all new construction projects to either halt or severely hamper future development. When researching local cities and towns in the area, I have not found one local wetlands ordinance that has a buffer zone from the bordering vegetated wetland more than 25 feet. Most a 25-foot no disturb zone and a 50-foot setback to the building or structure. Not unreasonable and consistent with the rules being applied today in Attleboro. It is simply arbitrary and excessive that the setback distance of 75 feet. I would suggest that this proposed setback distance be reworked and studied to consider the impact it is likely to cause on any future development in Attleboro. Thank you for your time and consideration. I made a couple of notes here after listening to a few people, and Mr. Hatch had mentioned the Tewksbury Wetlands Protection, local Wetlands Protection bylaw. It's probably the most well-written bylaw that I've seen, and I've researched quite a bit of it ever since the proposal was to change this particular setback. I would suggest that perhaps planning staff, or if there's an opportunity to perhaps get some other people involved, that players in that are likely to be impacted by this proposed change, it'd be a good time to perhaps sit down and discuss possibly some type of grandfathering provisions or some more language in what is known as Section 4.2 of the Attleboro Wetlands Protection Act. There is only like one sentence there. There isn't a lot of language to grant any latitude, so to speak. I agree. It's hard to say that a 75-foot setback is going to be detrimental than a 25-foot. There's no doubt. It'll obviously offer more protection to the wetland zone. So it's really hard to argue with that. I sat here listening to this and I'm like, what am I arguing about? But my job here is basically building homes. We develop land. I've been doing it for a number of years. We try to do the right thing. One other point I would like to make, and the mayor had brought it up earlier about cutting trees. And I'm involved in a project right now. We're actually having to clear cut some of the land. And as much as I, don't really want to cut trees, it's required in order to build homes. I think, more than just a Wetlands Protection Act here, or setback zone, zoning regulations need to be looked at, and try to encourage more dense developments and more, you could leave more open space around particular developments where you build dense and you leave open space. I don't see a lot of developers doing that at this time. A number of years ago, I tried it. It worked, but it was tough to do it. But I think the zoning regulations need to be looked at as well. I mean, we're not talking about that in this particular case here, but when you're talking about protecting the environment. I think it would be a good addition to what is trying to be accomplished with this particular wetland setback. So that's probably all I have to offer at the moment. Anyone have any questions? I'm more than happy to answer them.
Sorry, Bill. I saw Councilor Holmes, then Vice President Jackson, and Councilor Blair. Did you have questions?
So thank you for speaking. Were you against the 25-foot buffer at one point then?
Yes, a number of years ago, I was.
Okay. So how did that, thank you. So how did that impact your business? Because I know you were against it. And so I'm wondering, did it really impact?
Well, I think perhaps going forward, as we, designed and built additional subdivisions and built homes, we just learned that you had to move away 25 foot and then perhaps another 25 foot for your homes. Prior to that, there was nothing. You could basically almost build right up to that wetland line. And,
Okay, so there were adjustments that you were able to make, and it sounds like you were still able to be successful.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep.
Vice President Jackson.
Thank you, President Cooper. So, Mr. Ward, I know that when I returned to like city government, so to speak, I remember you building, I forget which part of, oh my gosh, off of Slater Street. I think it was number 2. What is it you're developing right now?
At Brigham Hill on Slater.
Thank you. Number 2. So I think you were number 2.
Yes.
And you were like talking about what was going on over there, and there's a lot of stuff happening, but you were able to develop the homes that you were able to develop around, but you also gave and take to the city, from what I understand, with like land and I think you did that with Victoria Estates as well, correct?
On the Brigham Hill subdivision off of Slater Street, it's essentially the underlying zoning is 20,000 square feet. So the lots are either that size or larger. And they're pretty much, there's no open space perhaps. That's a traditional subdivision that you would see require 120 feet wide, 170 foot deep lots. Victoria Estates on Reed Street that was developed probably 20 years ago. That was an open space development, and that was pretty successful, but we had very good soils there in order to install septic systems. Brigham Hill off of Slater Street, no, it requires removing trees and probably doing a lot of things that people don't really like me to do, but they're required in order to build the homes. So.
Thank you, but you did a great job.
I try to. Always.
Thank you, Mr. Ward.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Blair, did you have a question?
Just a clarification for Diana. Back when we enacted that 25-foot setback back in 2001, 2000, that started out at 100. And after probably almost 2 years, the council settled on 25 feet.
Thank. Any additional questions or comments for Mr. Ward? Bill, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too.
Is there anyone else here to speak in favor?
President Cooper, Suzanne Sharon of 1003 Oak Hill Ave, number 181, would like to speak against the ordinance.
Against.
Thank you. Ms. Sharon,
Thank you for
thank you. Can you hear us okay?
allowing me to have this time. I am against the rule for 75 foot, although what the description was tonight was clearer to me. We are selling property on Morse Avenue in South Attleboro. One of the lots has had an ANRAD and Form A, and we've had paid city tax, state and city taxes on it. And we, if it goes to the 75-foot buffer, we won't be able to sell it. We do have purchase and sale agreement on 4 lots there on Morse Avenue. It's important for us to sell it. My siblings and I, well, especially me, I need the money for medical support. I had COVID last July. I was hospitalized for 2 months and I was on a ventilator for part of that. And then in January, I had a stroke. And so whether the lot goes for 100,000, even that 20,000 that I get, I need it for medical expenses. And I need a repair on my roof. So I know that that's a personal issue, but I need to be able to sell that lot. It's had everything done to it. Is there any way that a grandfather clause or something like that that can be put in effect so that that lot will be able to be sold? That's all I got to say.
Thank you. So, Ms. Sharon, thank you for your testimony tonight. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but we spoke, I think it was last night on the phone, and I also spoke to Ted. And I'm going to tell you again what I told you last night. This isn't something that I anticipate passing overnight. In fact, we would leave the public hearing open. In addition to that, Gary this evening stated that he would suggest to this council a September, if he said if it were to pass tonight, and it's not going to, it's not even coming for a vote, he would suggest September. But in any event, he would suggest, I'd have to go back a couple of pages in my notes, but I think it was 120 days from the time it passes until the time it becomes effective. So based on our conversation, I think you're further along in the process, and Gary talked about what that meant. So I'm not guaranteeing anything. I'm just suggesting that this isn't something that is rapid fire going to happen, in the next 30 to 45 days. I just don't see it happening. Any questions for Ms. Sharon at this time? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else here to speak in opposition?
President Cooper, Ted Sharon of 23 Morse Ave would like to speak against the motion, the ordinance.
Thank you. Good evening. I don't see him on yet. So Jim, I don't know who's having the technical difficulty, if it's us or if it's Ted. But we just heard from his sister, so if we want to go to the next person and circle back to Ted, we can do that, but we also got his letter.
Ted was the last person to speak against.
Okay, so Ted can come back to the next meeting at this time. Is there anyone to speak for or against? All right, seeing none, I am going to keep this public hearing open and continue it until June 1st. All right, let me get myself together here and figure out where I'm at. I got paper everywhere. So unless anyone objects, I'm going to just assign the committees from the mayor's communication.
Beautiful.
I am so item number 1 is Public Safety and Emergency Management Committee. Item number 2 is the City Property and Claims Committee. Item number 3 is Budget and Appropriations Committee. Item number 5 is Personnel, Veterans, and Human Services Committee. Item number 5 is Public Works. The supplemental communication from the mayor is being assigned to, or the second communication, number 2, is being assigned to Ordinances, Elections, and Legislative Matters Committee. And if I could, I'll move on to the other communications from to the clerk. There is one, the first matter is the planning board vote for the discontinuance of Rathbun Willard Drive. That's to the zoning committee. And then there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 letters regarding the Wetlands Protection Ordinance that will be referred to the Ordinance Committee. Any questions on the assignments of the mayor's or the clerk's, the mayor's 2 communications or the clerk's communication? Being none, we'll move on to Committee of the Whole. Is there anyone here that would like to address the council on any piece of city business? Actually, I need a roll call vote to go into Committee of the Whole.
Yes, you do.
Do I have is there a motion?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor by roll call vote, starting with, where am I starting?
Council Blair.
I think it's Holmes because the roll call attendance started with Blair.
Mr. Blair. Yes, if you're going that way.
Ms. DeSimone.
Yes.
Mr. Conti.
Yes.
Mr. Waterman.
Yes.
Vice President Jackson.
Yes.
Mr. Cobus.
Yes.
Ms. Dolan.
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds.
Yes.
Ms. Holmes.
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. We are now in Committee of the Whole. Is there anyone that would like to address the council on any matter of city business? Now is the time to do so. Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to arise.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in order. A roll call vote will begin with Councilor Holmes.
Ms. Holmes.
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds.
Yes.
Ms. Dolan.
Yes.
Mr. Cobus.
Yes.
Vice President Jackson.
Yes.
Mr. Waterman.
Yes.
Conti.
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Moving right along to committee reports. We start first with Councilor Blair.
Thank you, Mark. Reporting for public safety and emergency management. I moved from the docket of May 4th, 2021. Excuse me. I moved to approve expending of the firefighter safety equipment grant from the Department of Fire Services for $20,000 and approving expending any future grant amendments awarded to the Attleboro Fire Department.
Second.
Thank you. Is in order. Any questions or comments?
I think we talked all these motions over quite thoroughly last week. If there's any questions from other councilors, I'll try to answer them.
Any questions from the council? Seeing none, a roll call vote will begin with Councilor Blair.
Blair,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Conti,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Cobus,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. From the docket of May 4th, 2021, I move to appropriate $36,446.63 from account 1000-3590000 undesignated fund balance, free cash, general government to account 1210100515075 police earned time funds due to a retirement on March 27th, 21.
Second.
Thank you. Motion's in order. Any additional comments?
No, none other than last week. I think we fully vented that and gave that retiree some kudos.
Thank you. Any additional comments from the council? Seeing none, a roll call vote will begin with Councilor Holmes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Mr. Cobus,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Mr. Conti,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Blair,
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. From the docket of May 4th, 2021, I move to appropriate $14,391.73 from account 1000-3590000 undesignated fund balance, free cash, general government to account 12100-000-558207 police investigative supply to purchase software and associated computer equipment to process cell phones and digital evidence.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in order. Any additional comments?
No, we discussed it last week, President Cooper in committee.
Thank you. Any additional questions from the council? Seeing none, a roll call vote will begin with Ms. Holmes.
Mr. Blair, I think, actually.
There we go.
Mr. Blair,
I'll vote in any order you want, yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Conti,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Cobus,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. From the docket of May 4th, 2021, I move to appropriate $50,000 from account 1000-3590000 undesignated fund balance, free cash, general government to account 1220100-513000 fire overtime.
Second.
Thank you. Motion's in order. Any additional comments?
We discussed this last week in length, I think, and hopefully the councilors understand why this is necessary.
Any additional questions from the council? Seeing none, a roll call vote will begin with Councilor Blair.
Blair,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Conti,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Cobus,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. And finally, from the docket of March 16th, 2021, I move to approve the request that the fire and police department disconnect from the city network and have individual networks to prevent a public safety emergency.
Second.
I will add to this a little. I know we discussed it last week, but in the meantime, we got an email from Bill Lennox stating what's been done. Up until last week, I knew of nothing that was being done, but we were enlightened with a an email listing what has been done. I still think that we need to put this in writing and send it up to the mayor so it doesn't get lost in the shuffle.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Seeing none. Oh, Vice President Jackson.
Excuse me, but I'm looking here, it's highlighted that it's also been referred to the administration, correct?
Yes, right. This
Okay,
is
good,
just,
good,
this
good,
is
good.
just writing it down so it's on record, Kate. That's
Thank
how I
you.
feel.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments? Seeing none, a roll call vote will begin with Councilor Holmes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
you said yes? I'm sorry, Sarah.
Yes, I said yes.
Sorry. Ms. Dolan,
yes,
Mr. Cobus,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Conti,
yes,
Ms. DeSimone,
yes,
Mr. Blair,
Yes,
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
thank you very much, my fellow councilors, and I request a committee meeting next week at the appropriate time.
All right. Thank you. Councilor DeSimone.
thank you, President Cooper. Transportation and Traffic has no business to report this evening. We look forward to a meeting, a committee meeting at the next appropriate time.
Thank you. Councilor Conti.
thank you, President Cooper. Reporting for capital improvements and city development. I have two motions for the council this evening from the docket of May 4th, 2021. I move to approve the expending of funds and any future grant amendments regarding the receipt of the Mass Development TDI Challenge Grant for approximately $45,000.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in order.
Fully discussed in committee.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Seeing none, a roll call vote will begin with Councilor Blair.
President Cooper,
Blair,
Yes.
excuse me, Catherine Farrick is on the call.
Okay. We're not accepting
Okay.
testimony on any of these matters at the moment. I'm assuming she's here to see the outcome of the next vote. Probably both of these really, but we'll keep moving right along. Thank you.
where were we at?
Roll call vote with Councilor Holmes.
Ms. Holmes. Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
Yes, sorry.
you say yes? I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Sorry. I had
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
yes,
Mr. Cobus,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Conti,
Yes,
Ms. DeSimone,
yes,
Mr. Blair,
Yes,
President Cooper,
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes. Councilor Conti, for the next motion, I know you read the full motion in committee. I would suggest that we could waive the reading of the,
that was exactly my intention.
thank you.
From the docket of May 4th, 2021, I move to authorize the following resolution for the mayor to enter into a TIE agreement with 2739 South Main Street, and all of this was read in committee.
Second.
second.
Thank you.
Motion is in order. Any additional comments? Councilor?
It was fully discussed in committee, and I don't think anything further needs to be said tonight.
Thank you. The only comment I'll make is if Catherine in Virginia put this together for tomorrow morning, I will come in Thursday morning and sign it. So with that said, we'll have a roll call vote beginning with Councilor Blair.
Blair,
yes,
Ms. DeSimone,
yes,
Conti,
Yes,
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Cobus,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
yes,
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
President Cooper,
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
that completes the business that the Capital Improvement City Development Committee has to bring before the council this evening. We look forward to a meeting at the next appropriate time.
Thank you. Councilor Waterman.
Yes, we have four motions this evening from the Personnel, Veterans, and Human Services Committee and from the docket of May 4th, 2021. I move to approve the appointment of Christina Rogers, 43 Pass Farm Road, to fill an expired term on the Board of Recreation Commissioners, term to expire 2024.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in order. Any additional comments?
I believe we had a good opportunity to meet Christina Rogers, and she has got excellent credentials and experience, and she'll do a great job.
Thank you. Councilor Blair.
I had the opportunity, Mr. President, to talk to Mr. Walsh over the last week, and he's very excited himself about this lady coming on the commission. So that goes kudos for her.
Great. Thank you. Any additional comments or questions? Seeing none, a roll call vote will begin, I think, with Councilor Holmes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yeah.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Cobus,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Conti,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Blair,
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
And also from the docket of May 4th, 2021, I would move to approve the following proposed changes to the personnel rules and regulations for exempt employees. That the MIS director position be budgeted for a 40-hour work week, and the 2 stipends, which are Article 19 stipends, be eliminated. In addition, the position should be added to Article 2, Section 2, stating that the individual must be available for duty 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, with an effective date of July 1, 2021 for the proposed changes.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, who seconded?
Sorry. Second.
Thank you. Any additional comments or questions?
Well, I believe we vetted this proposed change very well, and I believe we're all in support. I hope our MIS director is doing a tremendous job for us, and I think this will work out.
Yeah, thank you. I think that we'll probably see this in the future to be revised, because I don't think the last sentence of this is very attractive to many people. You got to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So while I'm in favor of supporting it today, it's coming back at some point, because that's who likes that. And that's my comments, and we can move to vote. Any additional questions or comments?
And it's not even union.
Roll call vote will begin with Councilor Blair.
Mr. Blair,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Conti,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Cobus,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
And also from the docket of May 4th, 2021, I move to approve moving the position of Personnel Assistant 2 to a grade 7 on the reclassification plan and personnel rules and regulations. A review of the Personnel Assistant 2 position has found the obligations and functions have changed significantly over the past several years.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in order. Any additional comments or questions?
Well, we heard from our personnel director that Personnel Assistant 2 is working very, very hard, and actually is working at a level where that person is appropriately qualified for a grade 7.
Thank you. Any additional comments or questions? Seeing none, a roll call vote will begin with Councilor Holmes.
Holmes,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Mr. Cobus,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Mr. Conti,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Blair,
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
And also from the docket of May 4th, 2021. I move to transfer $300 from account Citywide Reserve Fund for transfer to accounting, salary and wages to fund an accounting supervisor 1 position in June of 2021.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in order. Any additional comments?
I believe that we've all had an opportunity to hear about this. This is only going to be through the current fiscal year.
Thank you. A roll call vote is required and we'll begin with Councilor Blair.
Blair,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Conti,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Covas,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
And that concludes the business of the Personnel, Veterans, and Human Services Committee. I'll call for next committee at the next appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice President Jackson.
Thank you, President Cooper. Reporting for the Public Works Committee from the docket of May 4th, 2021. I move to approve the request of National Grid and Verizon to relocate a pole on the east edge of 831 West Street.
Second.
Thank you. Motion in order. Any additional comments?
No, we did not need to have a public hearing with regards to this because it is only to relocate a pole. It's not a new pole, and we only do new pole. When we have a new pole, that's when we have to have a public hearing.
Great. Thank you. Who seconded that? Kathleen.
Kathleen.
Yes, Councilor DeSimone.
Thank you. A roll call vote will begin with Councilor Holmes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Mrs. Dolan,
Yes.
Mr. Cobus,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Conti,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Blair,
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. From the docket of May 4th, 2021, I move to transfer $4,000 from account Citywide Reserve Fund for transfer to the account Public Works Heating to pay the heating bills for the remainder of fiscal year 2021.
Second.
Thank you. Motion.
Councilor Dolan.
Motion's in order. Any additional questions or comments?
No, this is just to pay the bills.
The roll call vote will begin with Councilor Blair.
Blair,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Conti,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Cobus,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. From the docket of May 4th, 2021, I move to transfer $4,000 from the Citywide Reserve Fund for transfer account to the Public Works Lights and Power account to pay the electric bills for the remainder of fiscal year 2021.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Dolan.
Thank you. Motion's in order. Any additional comments?
Nope, same as above.
Thank you. Roll call vote will begin with Councilor Holmes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Mr. Dolan,
Yes.
Mr. Cobus,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Mr. Conti,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Blair,
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Motion passes.
Thank you. From the docket of May 4th, 2021, to appropriate $27,426.30 from the undesignated fund balance free cash general government account to the Capron Park Zoo security system account for the installment of an early warning fence alarm system for zoo security purposes.
Second.
Thank you. Motion's in order. Any additional questions or comments?
I actually answered them all last week, but it sort of speaks for itself. I mean, they have an issue over there with people breaking in, and we don't want them to harm our beautiful animals. So the fencing needs to be replaced. It's pretty old, and they're going to bring it all up to date.
Great. Thank you. Any additional questions or comments? Seeing none, a roll call vote will begin with Councilor Blair.
Mr. Blair,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Conti,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Cobus,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
President Cooper,
Yes,
10 yeas, 0 nays.
thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. From the docket of May 4th, 2021, I move to appropriate $18,036.70 from the undesignated fund balance free cash general government account to the Capron Park Zoo building improvement account to replace 2 safety gates in the Bear Lion building.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you, Council Dolan. Motion is in order. Any additional questions or comments?
No, I have none. That was pretty cool, though, going in there a couple weeks ago.
A roll call vote will begin with Councilor Blair, I believe.
I agree.
Yes. Mr. Blair,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Conti,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Cobus,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
President Cooper,
Yes,
10 yeas, 0 nays.
thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. From the docket of May 4th, 2021, I move to transfer $9,000 from account Park and Forestry salary and wages to the following accounts. To account, $6,000 to account Park and Forestry Supply Grounds, $1,000 to account Park and Forestry Supply Vehicles, and $2,000 to Park and Forestry Supplies Equipment.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Council Dolan. I have no further comments. Thank you.
Thank you. A roll call vote will be, any additional comments from the council? A roll call vote will begin with Councilor Holmes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Mr. Cobus,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Conti,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Blair,
Yes.
President Cooper,
Yes,
10 yeas, 0 nays.
thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. From the docket of May 4th, 2021, to approve the expedition of a grant from the Massachusetts Association of Health Board in the approximate amount of $16,666.66, as well as any further grant amendments. The grant to the Health Department is for COVID-19 testing, prevention, and mitigation.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Dolan.
Thank you. Motion is in order. Councilor,
I am just so happy to see any kind of grants that we can get from the state at this time. And I'm very, very pleased with that.
thank you. I am too, but they couldn't have made it, thrown a few 7s or 8s in this number. It had to be all.
I know it kind of freaked me out too, but I wasn't going to say it.
The computer stuck.
A roll call vote will begin with Councilor Blair.
Mr. Blair,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Conti,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Cobus,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
President Cooper,
Yes,
10 yeas, 0 nays.
thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. From the docket of April 20th, 2021, I move to approve the request of National Grid and Verizon to install stub pole and wires across from pole 8992 at the intersection of West Street and Rocklawn Avenue. The public
Second.
is held on 4/20/21.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Dolan.
Any additional questions or comments?
Just that both this particular public hearing and the next one that's coming up along it, no one spoke against it whatsoever.
Great, thank you. A roll call vote will begin with Council Holmes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Mr. Cobus,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Mr. Conti,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Blair,
Yes.
President Cooper,
Yes,
10 yeas, 0 nays.
thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. From the docket of April 20th, 2021, I move to approve the request of National Grid to install a new pole 1592-50 on West Street, 45 feet west of pole 1592. And the public hearing was held on 4/20/21.
Second.
Thank you, Council Dolan.
Thank you. Motion's in order. Any additional questions or comments?
None
Seeing
for me.
roll call vote, we'll begin with Council Holmes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Mr. Cobus,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Waterman,
Yes.
Conti,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Blair,
yes,
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you, President Cooper. I have no further business this evening for the Public Works Committee, but would like to call for a committee meeting at the appropriate time next week.
Thank you. For budget and appropriations, I recognize Councilor Cobus.
Thank you. Reporting for Budget and Appropriations Committee from the docket of May 4th, 2021. I move to approve the transfer of $1,680 from account Citywide Reserve Fund for transfer to the following: $1,200 to account Collector Recordings, $480 to account Collector Advertising Services.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in order. Any additional comments?
This was Councilor Delicio brought this out last week, or brought this out of the committee last week and spoke about it. It's just to get the city collector through to the end of the year.
Great. Thank you. Any additional questions from the council? Seeing none, roll call vote will begin with Councilor Blair.
Mr. Blair,
yes,
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Conti,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Cobus,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
That concludes the business for the Budget and Appropriations Committee, and I call for committee meeting at the next appropriate time.
Thank you. And we'll stay right with you, Councilor Cobus.
Thank you. Reporting for Zoning and Land Use Committee from the docket of March 16th, 2021. I move to approve the partial discontinuance of Rathburn Willard Drive as a public way, length of approximately 530 feet, and approve said discontinuance as shown on the street discontinuance plan entitled Street Discontinuance and Easement Plan of Land dated January 15th, 2021, prepared by Daniel F. Fleming, PLS of Symbiotes Consultants Incorporated. Form H application for street discontinuance from the city of Attleboro regarding land at 100 Rathburn Willard Drive, including Assessor's Plat 114, lots 14, 19, 30, and 37.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in order. Any additional comments?
We spoke about this in committee. The planning board voted unanimously in favor of supporting this discontinuance. So I encourage people to also support it. Thank you.
Thank you. A roll call vote will begin with Council Holmes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Mr. Cobus,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Conti,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Blair,
yes,
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
That concludes the business for the Zoning and Land Use Committee. I call for committee meeting at the next appropriate time.
Thank you. Councilor Reynolds, no, Dolan, I'm sorry.
I have no business for the Licenses Committee this evening, and we look forward to a committee meeting at the next appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Councilor Reynolds.
Thank you. Reporting for City Property and Claims Committee from the docket of May 4th, 2021. I move to declare surplus and available for disposition the following police vehicle. It's a 213 Ford Explorer. It's in poor condition.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in order. Any additional questions or comments?
No.
Hearing none, a roll call vote will begin with Councilor Blair.
Mr. Blair,
yes,
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Conti,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Cobus,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
From the docket of May 4th, 2021, I move to declare the following collector's office equipment as surplus and available for disposition. One, NCR payment processor, it's obsolete.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in order. Any additional questions or comments?
No.
Seeing none, a roll call vote will begin with Council Holmes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Mr. Clovis,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
the Waterman,
Yes.
Mr. Conti,
yes,
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Blair,
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes. And Council Reynolds, I would suggest you waive the reading of the items for the next motion.
Okay, so I was going to do that or very much shorten it. So what I'm going to do is move to declare the following wastewater office equipment is surplus and available for disposition. I have 7 items. They're all inoperable.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in order. Any additional questions or comments?
I have none.
Thank you. A roll call vote will begin with Councilor Blair.
Mr. Blair,
Yes.
Mrs. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Conti,
yes,
the Waterman,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Clovis,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Motion passes.
Of May 4th, 2021, I move to accept the donation from Richard Cathcart of National Fence for a high black vinyl chain link fence. It's got a double swing gate and it's valued at $7,000.
Second.
Thank you. Motion's in order. Any additional comments?
I do not.
Thank you. A roll call vote will begin. Oh, Councilor Blair.
Just to reiterate my comments last week, Mr. Cathcart is a very generous man. This isn't the first time he's donated fence. And, you know, for $7,000, I think the fence he donated to Briggs Playground was even more than that. And I want to personally thank him. And once wasn't enough as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Seeing none, the roll call vote will begin with Councilor Blair.
Blair,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Conti,
yes,
the Waterman,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Clovis,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes. Sarah, anything else?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That is all the business City Property and Claims has this evening. I would like to call a committee meeting at the next appropriate time.
Thank you. And last but not least, Councilor Holmes.
Thank you. Reporting for Ordinance, Election, Legislative Matters Committee. I'm moving to strike something. That's the only business I have this evening. I'm moving from the docket of January 5th, 2021. I move to strike the
So Councilor Holmes, first read it as approved out of committee, and then you make an amendment to add the word from approved to strike.
Okay, thank you. And I'll explain after if everybody didn't get the email. So from the docket of January 5th, 2021, I move to approve the mayor's adoption of local option 940 CMR 29.1, 2, 3, and 10.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in
Who's the
order.
second? I'm sorry.
Councilor DeSimone.
Thank you.
Any additional comments, Councilor Holmes?
Thank you. So we did connect with the city solicitor on this, and it does appear like the administration has to mostly speak to this. The mayor did bring down an additional communication, and I hope everybody received the information from the city solicitor and the mayor. So at this point, it just makes sense to strike it from that. We don't have to vote on it because the administration has agreed to adopt this.
Yep, I think so. Now just make an amendment to.
Oh,
change.
I'm sorry. So that being said, I'd like to make an amendment to strike this from the record.
second,
Thank you. The motion is in order to change the word approved to moving to strike the mayor's adoption at this point. Any questions on the amendment? Council Reynolds.
I have a quick question. I just happened to be reading through some stuff online this afternoon, and this same thing is going through in, throughout the state. And Amherst counselors said that part of this part of this change states that document used for any such meeting should be made available to the public before or at the time of the meeting of the public body. And they were concerned about the ramifications of this requirement, that they had to be there before instead of having time to give them to everybody that attends the public meeting, later in the week. Now, so I'm concerned about that because we have time now to give people those things in a reasonable amount of time. But this is saying we'd have to have all that information available for the public prior to the meeting or at the time of the meeting, which I think is kind of difficult as well. So I'm just putting that out there. And I just happened to see it just before the meeting started.
Yep, I think that's one of the reasons why it's not necessarily a bad idea to put these things before the council, but in this case, per the city solicitor, we don't have to approve this. And so the good news, perhaps, is that this applies to every city board that operates under the open meeting law. So I think that the timing of the adoption, perhaps through the committee, the question needs to be asked, at least from my perspective, and I'll ask it, is, are those other committees prepared to do that? We just approved for all those, well, we didn't, the mayor did, approve to have this available to all cities, all city boards under the open meeting law. So I'm concerned about that, but that's not our space. So let them worry about it, but I will talk to the mayor about it.
Thank you. I'll send you a copy of what I found.
Thank you. So this is on the amendment to change from approved to strike. Any additional questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll have a roll call vote on the amendment first, and then the motion as amended second. Beginning with Councilor Holmes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Mr. Cobus,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson. Vice President Jackson,
You're muted.
you're muted, Kate. Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Mr. Conti,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Blair,
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion, the amendment passes. Now on to the main motion as amended. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, the roll call vote will begin with Councilor Blair.
Mr. Blair,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Conti,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
Yes.
Cobus,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes. And then just very quickly before I entertain the motion to adjourn, the next two committee meetings scheduled. The one on May 11th is a special meeting. You have the notice in your box. After the mayor presents to the council his budget for the next fiscal year, the Public Works Committee will go next, because the mayor is also going to speak about the Reed Street sidewalk project. And then we will go to ordinances, elections, and legislative matters. On the 25th, ordinances, elections, and legislative matters committee will start first. And if you have guests, I would start for that meeting, in preparation for that meeting, come with a time after 8 o'clock. So don't invite guests before the council on the 25th before 8 to give the ordinances, elections, and legislative matters committee that first hour of uninterrupted time to meet with as the committee. Any questions? Comments? Problems? Hearing none, I didn't entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second,
The roll call vote will begin with Councilor Blair.
Mr. Blair,
Yes.
Ms. DeSimone,
Yes.
Mr. Conti. Conti,
Yep, that's a yes.
He said yes. It's hard to hear.
thank you.
but
I
heard
couldn't
it.
hear him. Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Vice President Jackson,
yes.
Mr. Cobus,
Yes.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
Yes.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes,
10 yeas, 0 nays.
thank you. Motion passes. We are adjourned 10:36.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Diane, your house looks great.
Thank you. It's not, it doesn't look like a haunted house anymore.
Jeez.